Picture this, it's 3 in the morning, and Aurora Banks is pressed against the floor-to-ceiling windows of a Manhattan high-rise, her breath fogging the glass as Finn Cole's hands frame her face with a tenderness that makes her knees weak. The city lights below blur into starbursts as he whispers against her lips, "I've wanted this since the day you walked into that conference room and challenged everything I thought I knew about desire." Her fingers are tangled in his dark hair, still tousled from hours of running his hands through it, and when she looks into those warm hazel eyes that have haunted her dreams for months, she sees her own desperate longing reflected back. "Finn," she breathes, his name a prayer and a surrender all at once, and when he kisses her this time, it's with the fierce intensity of two people who've been dancing around their attraction for far too long. But how did we get here? How did a brilliant brand strategist who's spent years building walls around her heart and a creative director who's forgotten how to dream both end up trapped together in an office building, with nowhere to hide from the electricity that's been crackling between them for months? What happens when two people who've mastered the art of professional distance suddenly find themselves locked away from the world, with nothing but time and truth between them? Tonight, I'm going to tell you exactly how workplace tension can explode into the kind of passionate desire that changes everything. If you haven't already, hit that subscribe button and join our Dear Love Diaries family. Your special place in this community of heartfelt stories is waiting for you. These passionate journeys of souls connecting against all odds have brought together thousands of beautiful hearts just like yours. Make sure you hit the bell too, so you'll know immediately when a new story unfolds in our diary of love. It was a typical Friday evening at Sterling & Associates, one of Manhattan's most prestigious marketing firms, and most sensible people had already escaped to their weekend plans. But Aurora Banks had never been accused of being sensible when it came to her career. At 32, she'd clawed her way up from junior associate to senior brand strategist through sheer brilliance and an work ethic that made her colleagues both admire and worry about her. She sat in conference room B, her laptop screen casting a blue glow across her rich brown skin as she fine-tuned a presentation that could land the firm their biggest client yet. Her natural hair was pulled back in a sleek bun that had started the day perfect but now had a few rebellious curls escaping around her face, softening the sharp lines of her navy blazer. At 5'7", Aurora commanded attention wherever she went, but it wasn't just her striking beauty that made people stop and stare, it was the intelligence in her dark eyes and the way she carried herself like she owned every room she entered. What Aurora didn't know was that she was being watched. Finn Cole stood in the doorway of his office 3 floors up, sketching pad in hand, capturing the way the late afternoon light caught the gold flecks in her eyes as she concentrated. At 36, Finn had the kind of casual elegance that made expensive suits look effortless, but tonight he'd loosened his tie and rolled up his sleeves, revealing forearms that Aurora had definitely not been noticing for the past 6 months. His hazel eyes, warm like honey and just as sweet, tracked the movement of her pen as she made notes in the margins of her presentation. Finn's dark hair was perpetually tousled from his habit of running his hands through it when he was thinking, and right now, he was thinking about how Aurora Banks had completely derailed his ability to focus on anything that wasn't her. As the head creative director, Finn was supposed to be the artistic vision behind the firm's campaigns, but lately, his vision had been entirely consumed by one particular strategist who challenged him in ways that had nothing to do with marketing budgets and everything to do with the way she tilted her head when she disagreed with him in meetings. "Still here, Cole?" Finn jumped, quickly closing his sketch pad as Caroline Benson appeared beside him. The executive assistant had been with the firm for 15 years and had developed an uncanny ability to read the office dynamics like a soap opera script. "Just finishing up some concepts for the Morrison account," Finn said, which wasn't entirely a lie. He had been thinking about the Morrison account. He'd also been thinking about the way Aurora's laugh could light up the entire 42nd floor. Caroline followed his gaze down to the conference room where Aurora was still working, and her knowing smile made Finn's cheeks warm. "You know, she's been staying late every Friday for months now." "Same as you." "It's a busy season," Finn replied, but his voice lacked conviction. Caroline's eyes twinkled with mischief. "Well, I'm heading out." "You two workaholics don't stay too late." She paused, her expression softening. And Finn? Sometimes the most beautiful things happen when we stop being afraid of taking risks. Before Finn could ask what she meant, Caroline was clicking down the hallway in her sensible heels, leaving him alone with his thoughts and a sketch pad full of Aurora's profile. Down in conference room B, Aurora was having her own internal battle. She'd been aware of Finn's presence upstairs for the past hour. Something about the man made her hyper-aware of his proximity even when she couldn't see him. It was ridiculous, really. She was a professional woman with a career to build and goals to achieve. She didn't have time for the way her pulse quickened whenever Finn Cole walked into a room, or the way she found herself volunteering for projects just because she knew he'd be leading the creative team. Aurora had spent years watching her mother lose herself in relationship after relationship, each one promising love but delivering disappointment and sacrifice. She'd sworn she'd never make the same mistakes, never let anyone make her question her worth or compromise her ambitions. And yet, something about Finn made her wonder if maybe, just maybe, not all love required losing yourself. She shook her head, trying to focus on the presentation slides in front of her. The Morrison account was worth $12 million, and if she could land it, she'd be in line for the promotion to senior partner that she'd been working toward since she started at Sterling and Associates. This was not the time to be distracted by a creative director with kind eyes and an artist's soul that he tried to hide behind corporate suits. But as Aurora gathered her materials and headed toward the elevator, she couldn't shake the feeling that tonight was going to be different somehow. The building felt quieter than usual, the kind of hushed silence that made every sound seem amplified. Her heels clicked against the marble floors as she walked through the reception area, and she noticed that even the night security guard, Mr. Fleming, seemed to have stepped away from his post. The elevator arrived with a soft ding, and Aurora stepped inside, pressing the button for the parking garage. But just as the doors started to close, a familiar voice called out, "Hold the elevator." Finn appeared around the corner, slightly out of breath, his laptop bag slung over his shoulder and his tie hanging loose around his neck. Aurora's finger hovered over the door open button for just a moment too long. Long enough to appreciate the way his dress shirt clung to his lean frame and the way his hair was even more disheveled than usual. "Thanks," he said as he stepped into the elevator, and Aurora caught a hint of his cologne, something clean and masculine that made her want to lean closer instead of pressing herself against the opposite wall like a sensible person would do. "Working late again?" she asked, proud of how normal her voice sounded despite the fact that they were now trapped in a small space together, and she could feel the warmth radiating from his body even though he was standing a respectable distance away. "You know me, slave to the creative process," Finn replied, and his smile was the kind that crinkled the corners of his eyes and made Aurora forget why she'd ever thought dating coworkers was a bad idea. "What about you? Don't you have some exciting Friday night plans that don't involve PowerPoint presentations?" Aurora laughed, and she didn't miss the way Finn's eyes lingered on her mouth. "Oh, you know, the usual glamorous single life. Thai takeout and a Netflix marathon." She paused, then added with a hint of mischief, "What about you? Hot date with your sketch pad?" The elevator suddenly shuddered to a stop between floors, and both Aurora and Finn reached for the control panel at the same time. Their hands collided over the emergency button, and Aurora felt a jolt of electricity shoot up her arm at the contact. Finn's hand was warm and slightly rough from his artistic hobbies, and for a moment, neither of them moved. "Sorry," Finn murmured, but he didn't pull his hand away immediately. His thumb brushed across Aurora's knuckles, a touch so light it might have been accidental, but the way his breathing changed suggested otherwise. "It's okay," Aurora whispered, and she was acutely aware of how close they were standing, how she could see the flecks of green and gold in his hazel eyes, how his lips were slightly parted as if he wanted to say something but couldn't find the words. The elevator shuddered back to life, breaking the spell, and both of them stepped apart as if they'd been burned. The rest of the ride to the parking garage was filled with the kind of charged silence that made Aurora's skin tingle with possibilities she refused to acknowledge. "Have a good weekend," Aurora," Finn said as the doors opened, and the way he said her name, like it was something precious, made her stomach flutter with butterflies. "You too, Finn," she replied, and as she walked toward her car, she could feel his eyes on her until the elevator doors closed again. What Aurora didn't know was that Finn hadn't actually pressed a button for any floor. He'd gotten on that elevator with no destination in mind except the hope of a few more minutes in her presence. And as he rode back up to the 42nd floor to retrieve the portfolio he deliberately left behind, he couldn't stop thinking about the way her hand had felt under his, warm and soft and somehow perfect. The building was even quieter now, with most of the cleaning crew having finished their rounds on the lower floors. Finn made his way back to his office, telling himself he was just being thorough, just making sure he had everything he needed for the weekend. But as he gathered his forgotten portfolio, he found himself looking down at conference room B again, half hoping and half dreading that Aurora might have come back too. She had. Aurora sat in her car in the parking garage for exactly 12 minutes before admitting to herself that she'd left her lucky pen upstairs, the vintage Mont Blanc her grandmother had given her for graduation, the one she always used for important presentations. It was ridiculous superstition, but Aurora had learned not to question the things that made her feel confident and powerful. So here she was, riding the elevator back up to the 42nd floor, trying not to think about the way Finn's thumb had traced across her knuckles or the way his eyes had darkened when she'd mentioned being single. She was a professional woman retrieving a professional tool for a professional presentation. Nothing more. The conference room was exactly as she'd left it, her lucky pen lying next to the stack of printouts she'd been reviewing. But as Aurora reached for it, she heard the soft sound of jazz music coming from somewhere down the hall. She followed the sound, her curiosity getting the better of her professional judgment, and found herself standing outside Finn's office. The door was slightly ajar, and through the gap, she could see him standing at his drafting table, completely absorbed in whatever he was working on. He'd taken off his jacket and rolled his sleeves up past his elbows, and the late evening light streaming through his office windows caught the subtle highlights in his dark hair. The jazz music was coming from a small speaker on his desk, something sultry and intimate that made Aurora think of dimly lit bars and secret conversations. She should leave. She should go home to her Thai takeout and her Netflix marathon and pretend that seeing Finn Cole in his natural artistic element didn't make her want things she'd spent years convincing herself she didn't need. But something about the scene in front of her, the way he moved with such focused grace, the way the music seemed to wrap around him like a lover's embrace, made her feet refuse to move. Finn must have sensed her presence because he looked up suddenly, his eyes meeting hers through the crack in the door. For a moment, they just stared at each other, the jazz music filling the silence with promises and possibilities. "Forgot something?" he asked, setting down his pencil and walking toward the door. "My lucky pen," Aurora said, holding up the Mont Blanc as if it were evidence of her innocence. "I never give presentations without it." Finn opened the door wider, and Aurora caught a glimpse of his drafting table. It was covered with sketches, building facades, abstract designs, and what looked suspiciously like portraits. "Lucky pen, huh? I have a lucky pencil. This one, actually." He held up a well-worn pencil that looked like it had seen years of use. "Had it since art school." "Art school?" Aurora stepped into his office without quite meaning to, drawn by this glimpse into a part of Finn's life she'd never seen. "I didn't know you went to art school." Finn's smile was slightly self-conscious. "RSD. Seemed like a good idea at the time, before I discovered that artistic integrity doesn't pay the bills." He gestured toward his drafting table. "I still sketch sometimes, when I need to clear my head." Aurora moved closer to the table, and her breath caught when she realized what she was looking at. Mixed in with the architectural drawings and abstract designs were portraits. Beautifully detailed sketches of people, capturing not just their physical features but something deeper, more essential. And there, partially hidden under a stack of other drawings, was a sketch that made her heart stop. It was her. Not just her face, but her essence somehow, the way she looked when she was deep in thought, the slight tilt of her head when she was listening intently, the spark in her eyes when she was passionate about an idea. Finn had captured something in that sketch that Aurora barely recognized in herself, something beautiful and powerful and utterly feminine. "Finn," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the jazz music. He moved to cover the sketch, his cheeks flushing with embarrassment. "I'm sorry, I know that's probably weird. You have an interesting face. From an artistic perspective, I mean." But Aurora stopped his hand before he could hide the drawing, her fingers wrapping around his wrist. "It's beautiful," she said, and she meant it. I look like someone worth knowing." The way she said it, with a hint of wonder and vulnerability, made Finn's chest tighten with an emotion he didn't quite know how to name. "Aurora, you are someone worth knowing. You're brilliant and driven and—" He paused, struggling to find words that wouldn't cross the line between professional and personal. "You're extraordinary." Aurora looked up at him, and in that moment, the careful distance they'd maintained for months seemed to evaporate. They were standing close enough that she could see the faint scar on his chin, close enough that she could smell his cologne mixed with something that was uniquely him. The jazz music wrapped around them like a cocoon, and Aurora felt herself leaning slightly forward, drawn by a force she'd been fighting for far too long. "I can already feel your hearts racing just like theirs were." Drop a heart emoji if you've ever felt that electric tension with someone you couldn't have, and tell us in the comments about a time when attraction caught you completely off guard. That's when the building's security system chose that exact moment to malfunction. Chapter 2. A sharp alarm pierced through the intimate jazz melody, followed immediately by the mechanical whir of security shutters sliding down over every window in the building. Aurora and Finn jumped apart as if they'd been caught doing something far more scandalous than simply sharing a moment of connection, their hearts hammering from both the sudden noise and the electricity that had been building between them. "What the hell?" Finn moved to his window, but the security shutter had already descended, blocking their view of the city below. Emergency lighting flickered on throughout the building, casting everything in an eerie blue-white glow that made the whole situation feel surreal. Aurora's phone buzzed with an automated text message, and she read it aloud with growing disbelief. "Security lockdown initiated. All personnel must remain in building until system reset. Estimated duration, 8 to 12 hours. Authorities have been notified." 8 to 12 hours? Finn ran his hands through his hair, making it even more disheveled than usual. There has to be some mistake. As if summoned by their confusion, Finn's office phone rang. He answered it on speaker, and Noah Fleming's gravelly voice filled the room with weary authority. "Mr. Cole? This is Fleming, building security. I see you and Ms. Banks are still in the building. What's happening, Fleming?" Finn asked, his creative director voice automatically switching to problem-solving mode. "Why can't we leave?" "System malfunction in the main security hub," Fleming explained, and Aurora could hear the frustration in his voice. "The whole building's locked down tight, windows, exits, even the stairwells. I'm stuck down here in the lobby, and you two are stuck up there until our IT specialist can get in tomorrow morning to reset everything manually." Aurora sank into one of Finn's office chairs, the reality of their situation hitting her like a physical blow. "Tomorrow morning? We're trapped here all night?" "I'm afraid so, miss. The good news is the building's climate control and emergency lighting will stay on. There's food in the break room fridges, and the executive lounge has some blankets and pillows for the couch. I've already called Jerome Danford, he's our IT manager, but he's at his daughter's wedding upstate. Can't get back until first thing in the morning." Finn and Aurora looked at each other across his office, the weight of the situation settling between them like a challenge. 8 to 12 hours. Alone. Together. With nowhere to run from the attraction that had been simmering between them for months. "We'll manage," Finn said into the phone, though his voice was slightly hoarse. Thank you for letting us know, Fleming. I'll keep you posted if anything changes. Try to get some rest, folks. It's going to be a long night. The line went dead, leaving Aurora and Finn in a silence that felt charged with possibilities and dangers in equal measure. The jazz music was still playing softly from Finn's speaker, but now it seemed to emphasize their isolation rather than create intimacy. So, Aurora said, standing up and smoothing down her blazer in a gesture that Finn was beginning to recognize as her way of regaining control. I guess we should find those blankets Fleming mentioned. Right, Finn agreed, grabbing his jacket from the back of his chair. And food. We should probably eat something if we're going to be here all night. They made their way through the dimly lit hallways, the emergency lighting casting long shadows that seemed to follow them like silent observers. The building felt different at night, larger somehow, full of corners that had always been softly lit but now seemed mysterious and intimate. Their footsteps echoed in the silence, and Aurora found herself acutely aware of Finn's presence beside her, the way he naturally adjusted his longer stride to match hers, the way he held doors open without making a show of it. The executive break room was a testament to Sterling and Associates' success: granite countertops, stainless steel appliances, and windows that would have showcased a breathtaking view of Manhattan if the security shutters hadn't transformed them into blank metal walls. Aurora opened the refrigerator and found the remnants of various employees' lunches and dinners. Chinese takeout, she asked, holding up a container that smelled promising. From Chen's garden, Finn said, recognizing the container. That's mine, actually. I ordered way too much yesterday. He paused, then added with a self-conscious smile, I have a tendency to overorder when I'm stressed. What were you stressed about? Aurora asked as she opened the container, revealing perfectly good lo mein and orange chicken. Finn was quiet for a moment, debating how honest to be. The Morrison presentation, he said finally. It's a big account. What he didn't say was that he'd been stressed because Aurora had been leading the strategy team for the Morrison account, which meant hours of meetings where he had to sit across from her and pretend to focus on market demographics when all he could think about was the way she gestured with her hands when she was excited about an idea. They found plastic forks and settled across from each other at the small breakfast bar, sharing the Chinese food like it was the most natural thing in the world. The intimacy of eating from the same containers, of Finn pushing the better pieces of chicken toward Aurora's side, of Aurora automatically giving him most of the pineapple because she noticed he picked it out first, it all felt dangerously domestic. This is good, Aurora said, and she meant more than just the food. There was something comfortable about this, about being with Finn without the usual office dynamics and professional boundaries. I never eat at the office. Too worried about spilling something on my clothes. Really? I practically live on break room food, Finn admitted. Caroline's always telling me I need to eat more vegetables, like she's my mother or something. Aurora laughed, and the sound filled the break room with warmth. Caroline mothers everyone. She keeps healthy snacks in her desk drawer for the junior associates. She asked me once if I was dating anyone, Finn said, then immediately looked like he regretted sharing that information. Aurora's fork paused halfway to her mouth. What did you tell her? The truth. That I'm not really the dating type. Finn met her eyes across the breakfast bar. What about you? Anyone special waiting for you to get home? Aurora shook her head, and something in her expression made Finn's chest tighten with an emotion he didn't want to examine too closely. No one waiting. I'm not really the dating type either. They finished eating in a silence that felt charged with unspoken questions and possibilities. As Aurora gathered the empty containers, her shoulder brushed against Finn's arm, and both of them froze at the contact. It was such a simple touch, barely more than a whisper of fabric against fabric, but it sent heat racing through Aurora's veins like liquid fire. Sorry, she murmured, but she didn't step away immediately. It's okay, Finn said, his voice rougher than usual. He turned slightly toward her, and suddenly they were close enough that Aurora could see the way his pupils had dilated, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his skin. For a moment, they just stood there in the dim light of the break room, surrounded by the quiet hum of appliances and the distant sound of the building settling around them. Aurora could smell Finn's cologne again, mixed with something that was uniquely him, and she had the sudden, dangerous urge to lean forward and discover what his skin would taste like. Instead, she stepped back, putting safe distance between them. "We should find those blankets," Fleming mentioned. The executive lounge was on the 41st floor, accessible by a key card that Finn had as a department head. It was designed for impressing clients: leather furniture, a full bar, and floor-to-ceiling windows that would normally showcase a spectacular view of the city. Now, with the security shutters down, it felt like a luxurious cave. Aurora found a stack of high-quality blankets in a cedar chest, along with pillows that smelled faintly of lavender. The couch was large enough for 2 people, but sleeping arrangements were a problem they'd worry about later. For now, they were both focused on the strange intimacy of being alone together in a space that felt removed from the rest of the world. Finn had found the climate control system, and he adjusted the temperature as Aurora arranged the blankets on the couch. The air conditioning had been running at office temperature, but now that they were settling in for the night, the space felt too cold. "Better?" he asked, noticing Aurora rubbing her arms through her blazer. "Much, thank you." Aurora sat on one end of the couch, tucking her legs under her in a way that made her look younger, less guarded. "This is surreal, isn't it? Being trapped here like this." Finn settled on the other end of the couch, maintaining a respectful distance even though every instinct he had was urging him to move closer to her warmth. "When I was a kid, I used to dream about spending the night in places I wasn't supposed to be. Museums, libraries, department stores. I thought it would be like having a secret world all to myself. And now that you're actually doing it?" Aurora asked, genuinely curious about this glimpse into Finn's childhood dreams. "It's better than I imagined," he said, and the way he looked at her when he said it made Aurora's breath catch. "The company makes all the difference." Aurora felt heat rise in her cheeks, and she looked down at her hands to hide her reaction. This was dangerous territory. This warmth between them, this growing sense of intimacy that had nothing to do with their professional relationship and everything to do with the way Finn made her feel like she was the only woman in the world when he looked at her like that. "Tell me something about yourself that I don't know," Finn said suddenly, and Aurora looked up to find him studying her with an intensity that made her pulse quicken. "What do you want to know?" she asked, though part of her was terrified of what he might ask and what she might be tempted to tell him. "Anything. Everything." Finn shifted slightly on the couch, and Aurora noticed the way the emergency lighting caught the sharp line of his jaw, the way his shirt had wrinkled slightly from their evening of unexpected adventure. "We've worked together for months, but I feel like I don't really know you at all." Aurora was quiet for a long moment, debating how much truth she was willing to share. There was something about the isolation, about being cut off from the rest of the world, that made honesty feel less dangerous somehow. "I wanted to be a teacher when I was little," she said finally. "Elementary school. I used to line up my stuffed animals and teach them math and reading." Finn smiled at the image. "What changed your mind?" "Reality," Aurora said with a rueful laugh. "My mom worked 3 jobs to keep us afloat after my dad left, and I realized pretty quickly that following your dreams is a luxury not everyone can afford. Business was practical. Marketing was stable. And I was good at it. Are you happy?" The question was simple, but the way Finn asked it, with genuine concern and interest, made Aurora feel like her answer mattered to him in a way that went beyond polite conversation. Aurora considered the question seriously. "I'm successful. I'm independent. I'm respected in my field." She paused. "I suppose that's a kind of happiness. But is it the kind you wanted?" The question hung between them in the dimly lit lounge, and Aurora found herself looking into Finn's hazel eyes, seeing something there that made her chest tighten with longing. When was the last time someone had asked her what she wanted, not what she'd achieved or accomplished, but what she actually wanted for herself? "I don't know," she admitted, and the honesty of it surprised her. "I've been so focused on building the life I thought I should want that I'm not sure I remember what I actually do want anymore." Finn leaned forward slightly, and Aurora caught a hint of his cologne mixed with the warmth of his skin. "What do you think you might want, if you let yourself really think about it?" Aurora's heart started beating faster, because the answer that came immediately to mind was dangerous and wonderful and absolutely impossible given their professional relationship. She wanted someone to see her the way Finn had captured her in that sketch, beautiful and strong and worth knowing. She wanted someone who asked her about her dreams instead of just her quarterly projections. She wanted someone who looked at her the way Finn was looking at her right now, like she was something precious and surprising. But instead of saying any of that, she deflected. "What about you? Art school to creative director, are you living your dream?" Finn laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Some version of it, I guess. I get to create things, solve visual problems, work with concepts and ideas. But sometimes I wonder if I've traded my artistic soul for a steady paycheck." "Do you still paint?" "Outside of work, I mean. Sketch mostly. And only when I can't sleep, which has been happening more often lately." Finn paused, then added with careful nonchalance, "I've been having trouble turning my brain off at night." Aurora wondered if his insomnia had anything to do with her, if he lay awake thinking about their interactions the way she did, replaying conversations and analyzing every glance, every accidental touch. The thought made her feel both thrilled and terrified. The building settled around them with a soft groan, reminding them both of their unusual circumstances. Aurora pulled one of the blankets around her shoulders as the temperature continued to drop without the building's usual climate control system running at full capacity. "Are you cold?" Finn asked, noticing the way she'd pulled the blanket closer. "A little. These office buildings are always freezing, but it's worse without the normal heating system." Without thinking about the implications, Finn moved closer on the couch. "We could share," he said, indicating the blanket. "Body heat is more efficient than trying to warm up separately." Aurora knew she should say no. She knew that sharing a blanket with Finn Cole in their current situation was asking for trouble. But she was cold, and he was warm, and something about being trapped together had lowered her usual defenses. "Okay," she said softly, and scooted over to make room for him. Finn settled beside her, and Aurora lifted the blanket so it could cover both of them. Suddenly, they were sharing the same small space, their shoulders touching, their thighs aligned along the couch cushions. Aurora could feel the heat radiating from Finn's body, could smell his cologne mixed with something that was uniquely him, and her awareness of him intensified until it felt like every nerve ending was on high alert. "Better?" Finn asked, his voice slightly rougher than usual. "Much," Aurora whispered, though she wasn't sure if she meant warmer or if she meant something else entirely. Something about the rightness of being close to him, the way her body seemed to relax into his warmth despite her mind's protests. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, both of them hyper-aware of every point of contact, every shift in position, every breath. Aurora found herself studying Finn's hands where they rested on his thighs, artist's hands, with long fingers and calluses from holding pencils and brushes. Finn was memorizing the way Aurora's hair had started to escape its professional bun, the way a few curls were framing her face and making her look softer, more approachable than her usual corporate persona. The emergency lighting cast everything in a blue-white glow that made the familiar office space feel otherworldly, like they'd been transported to some alternate reality where normal rules didn't apply. Aurora found herself relaxing against Finn's side, her head finding the perfect spot on his shoulder as if it had been designed specifically for her. "Aurora?" Finn's voice was soft in the dim light, and she could feel the rumble of it through his chest where her cheek was pressed against him. "I'm glad you forgot your pen," he said quietly. "I'm glad you came back upstairs." Aurora tilted her head to look at him, and suddenly they were much closer than either of them had realized. Finn's face was only inches from hers, his hazel eyes dark with something that made her pulse race with anticipation and fear in equal measure. "I'm glad too," she whispered, and meant it with every fiber of her being. The space between them seemed to crackle with electricity, and Aurora could feel her heart beating so hard she was sure Finn must be able to hear it. This was the moment she should pull away, should remind them both about professional boundaries and the complications that would arise if they crossed this line. Instead, she found herself leaning closer. "Aurora," Finn breathed, and her name sounded like a prayer on his lips. "I know we shouldn't," she whispered, but even as she said it, she was closing the distance between them, drawn by a force that felt stronger than logic or professional wisdom. "We shouldn't," Finn agreed, but his hand was coming up to cup her cheek, his thumb tracing the line of her cheekbone with reverent gentleness. The kiss, when it finally happened, was soft and tentative at first, both of them giving each other time to change their minds, to pull away, to pretend this wasn't happening. But when Aurora's lips moved against his with a sigh that sounded like surrender, when her hand came up to rest against his chest and she could feel his heart racing beneath her palm, the careful control they'd both been maintaining for months finally snapped. Finn's arms came around her, pulling her closer as the kiss deepened, and Aurora melted into him like she'd been waiting her whole life for this moment. He tasted like possibility and promise, like all the dreams she'd talked herself out of wanting, and when his fingers tangled in her hair, destroying what was left of her professional bun, she didn't care about anything except the way he was holding her like she was precious and necessary and perfect exactly as she was. But just as Aurora was losing herself completely in the sensation of Finn's lips against hers, just as she was forgetting every reason why this was a terrible idea, a loud crash echoed through the building, followed by the mechanical whir of the ventilation system shutting down completely. They broke apart instantly, both breathing hard, both looking slightly dazed by what had just happened. The sudden silence in the building was deafening after the constant background hum of the climate control system, and the reality of their situation came crashing back like a bucket of cold water. "That didn't sound good," Finn said, his voice hoarse, and Aurora noticed that his lips were slightly swollen from their kiss, that his hair was even more disheveled than usual where her fingers had been running through it. Aurora touched her own lips unconsciously, still feeling the warmth of Finn's mouth against hers, still tasting the promise of something that scared her more than she wanted to admit. "We should check what happened," she said, but she made no move to get up from the couch, to move away from the warmth of Finn's body beside hers. "We should," Finn agreed, but his eyes were still focused on her mouth, and Aurora could see the struggle playing out across his features, the battle between responsibility and desire, between what they should do and what they wanted to do. The building settled around them with another groan, and the spell was broken. Aurora stood up quickly, smoothing down her blazer and trying to finger-comb her hair back into some semblance of professional order. The kiss had been a mistake. A beautiful, earth-shattering mistake that she could still feel burning through her veins like liquid fire. We should," she started, then stopped, because what could she say? That she was sorry? She wasn't sorry, not even a little bit. That it wouldn't happen again? She wasn't sure she could make that promise and keep it. Finn stood up too, running his hands through his hair in a gesture Aurora was beginning to recognize as his way of dealing with stress or confusion. "Aurora, Let's just focus on figuring out what's wrong with the building," Aurora interrupted, because she wasn't ready to hear whatever Finn was going to say. She wasn't ready to analyze what had just happened between them or discuss the implications or pretend that everything could go back to normal after a kiss that had turned her entire world upside down. They made their way through the dim corridors, following the sound of what seemed to be emergency generators kicking in somewhere in the bowels of the building. The kiss hung between them like a living thing, changing the way they moved around each other, the way Aurora was hyper-aware of every accidental brush of Finn's hand against hers, the way Finn kept stealing glances at her profile when he thought she wasn't looking. The main elevator bank was completely dark, with emergency lighting providing just enough illumination to see the out of order signs that hadn't been there earlier. Aurora tried her key card on the stairwell door, but the lock didn't even light up. Total system failure, Finn observed, though his technical diagnosis probably wasn't necessary. Fleming wasn't kidding about us being trapped. How long did he say until the IT manager could get here? Aurora asked, though she remembered perfectly well. She just needed something practical to focus on, something that didn't involve thinking about the way Finn's hands had felt in her hair or the way he'd whispered her name like it was something sacred. Jerome Danford. First thing in the morning. Finn checked his phone, though the screen showed no signal. It's almost midnight now. We're looking at least 6 or 7 more hours. 6 or 7 more hours alone together, with the memory of that kiss burning between them and nowhere to run from the attraction that had been building for months. Aurora felt a flutter of panic mixed with something that felt dangerously like anticipation. They made their way back to the executive lounge, moving carefully through the emergency lighting. The temperature had already started to drop noticeably without the climate control system, and Aurora found herself shivering slightly in her lightweight blazer. "Here," Finn said, shrugging out of his suit jacket. "You're cold." "I'm fine," Aurora protested automatically, but Finn was already draping his jacket around her shoulders, and the warmth of it, still carrying his scent and the heat from his body, made her want to wrap herself in it like armor against her own treacherous thoughts. "Thank you," she said softly, and when she looked up at him, she saw something in his hazel eyes that made her breath catch, a tenderness that went beyond simple concern for her comfort, a look that suggested the kiss had affected him just as profoundly as it had affected her. They settled back on the couch, but this time there was a careful distance between them, both of them acutely aware of what had happened the last time they'd shared a blanket. Aurora pulled Finn's jacket closer around her shoulders, breathing in the scent of his cologne and something that was uniquely him, trying not to think about how right it felt to be wearing something of his. "We should probably try to get some sleep," Finn said, though his voice suggested that sleep was the last thing on his mind. "Probably," Aurora agreed, but she made no move to lie down, to close her eyes, to pretend that she could possibly sleep when every nerve in her body was still humming from their kiss. They sat in silence for a while, both lost in their own thoughts, both stealing glances at each other when they thought the other wasn't looking. The emergency lighting cast everything in blue-white shadows, making the familiar office space feel otherworldly, like they'd been transported to some alternate reality where normal rules didn't apply. "Aurora?" Finn's voice was soft in the darkness. "Yes?" "I don't want you to think that kiss was just. I mean, it wasn't just because we're trapped here together. I've been thinking about kissing you for months." Aurora's heart started beating faster, because his honesty demanded honesty in return, and she wasn't sure she was brave enough to give it to him. "Finn, I know it's complicated. I know we work together, and I know there are a dozen reasons why this is a bad idea. But I also know that I've never felt about anyone the way I feel about you, and I couldn't spend the night pretending otherwise." Aurora closed her eyes, trying to steady herself against the wave of emotion that crashed over her at his words. This was what she'd been afraid of, not just the attraction, but the deeper connection, the way Finn made her want things she'd convinced herself she didn't need. "I'm scared," she admitted, the words barely audible in the quiet lounge. "Of me?" Finn asked, and there was such genuine concern in his voice that Aurora's chest tightened with something that felt dangerously like love. "Of this. Of us. Of what it might mean." Aurora pulled his jacket tighter around her shoulders, as if it could protect her from her own vulnerability. "I've spent years building my career, building my independence. I've watched too many women lose themselves in relationships, compromise their dreams for men who didn't deserve the sacrifice." Finn was quiet for a long moment, processing her words, understanding the depth of her fear. "What if I told you that you make me want to be better? That being around you makes me remember why I became an artist in the first place, makes me want to create things that matter?" Aurora opened her eyes and found Finn watching her with an intensity that made her feel exposed and cherished all at once. "What are you saying?" I'm saying that you don't make me want to diminish you or change you or turn you into someone else. You make me want to be worthy of you exactly as you are, brilliant and driven and absolutely magnificent. Finn shifted slightly closer, and Aurora didn't pull away. I'm saying that maybe the right person doesn't make you smaller. Maybe they make you braver. The words hit Aurora like a physical blow, because they spoke to every secret hope she'd been too afraid to acknowledge. What if love didn't have to mean sacrifice? What if it could mean partnership, support, someone who celebrated her ambitions instead of feeling threatened by them? I don't know how to do this, she whispered, and she wasn't just talking about workplace relationships or the complications their situation would create. She was talking about letting someone see her vulnerable, about trusting someone with her heart, about believing that she could be loved for who she was instead of who she thought she should be. Neither do I, Finn admitted, and his honesty was like a balm to her fears. But I know I want to try. I know that whatever this is between us feels too important to ignore because it's inconvenient or complicated. Aurora looked at him, really looked at him, and saw not just the creative director she'd been professionally attracted to for months, but the artist who sketched her when he couldn't sleep, the man who asked about her dreams instead of just her achievements, the person who made her feel like she was enough exactly as she was. What are we doing? She asked, but this time the question sounded less like panic and more like wonder. I don't know, Finn said, and he reached out to touch her face again, his thumb tracing the line of her cheekbone with reverent gentleness. But I know I don't want to stop. This time, when he leaned in to kiss her, Aurora met him halfway, and the kiss was deeper, more purposeful than the first one, full of the honesty they'd just shared and the decision they'd both made to stop running from what was happening between them. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Aurora rested her forehead against Finn's. This changes everything, she whispered against his lips. Everything, Finn agreed, and the way he said it, like a promise instead of a warning, made Aurora's heart race with possibilities she'd never allowed herself to imagine. They settled back against the couch cushions, and this time Aurora didn't hesitate when Finn opened his arms in invitation. She curled into his side, her head finding the perfect spot on his shoulder, his jacket still wrapped around her like a cocoon of warmth and safety. Finn's hand came up to stroke her hair, now completely free from its professional bun and cascading over her shoulders in soft waves. Tell me something else, Finn said, his voice rumbling through his chest where Aurora's cheek was pressed against him. Something you've never told anyone. Aurora was quiet for a long moment, breathing in the scent of his cologne and the warmth of his skin, feeling safer than she had in years. There was something about being held like this, about the darkness and isolation that made confession feel less dangerous. The rest of the night stretched ahead of them, full of possibilities and conversations and the promise of discovering who they really were when all the professional pretenses were stripped away. Aurora felt herself relaxing into Finn's embrace, into this new reality where she was brave enough to let someone see her completely, and for the first time in years, she wasn't afraid of what tomorrow might bring. Chapter 3. Aurora felt like she was floating in a dream where time had no meaning and the outside world had ceased to exist. Wrapped in Finn's arms, with his jacket still draped around her shoulders like a shield against reality, she'd never felt more protected or more terrified in her life. Every breath brought the scent of his cologne mixed with something uniquely him, every heartbeat reminded her that she was crossing a line she'd sworn she'd never cross. Tell me about your first heartbreak, Finn said softly, his fingers tracing lazy patterns through her hair that had completely escaped its professional constraints hours ago. Aurora stiffened slightly at the unexpected question, but something about the darkness and their shared vulnerability made honesty feel safer than self-protection. I was 24. His name was Marcus, and he was everything I thought I wanted: successful lawyer, beautiful apartment, looked perfect on paper. What happened? Finn's voice was gentle, without judgment, and Aurora found herself relaxing back into his warmth. He wanted me to quit my job and move to Seattle with him for his promotion. Said I could find something part-time, maybe work from home. Aurora's laugh was bitter with old pain. When I told him I'd worked too hard to throw away my career for his, he said I was selfish. That if I really loved him, I'd want to support his dreams. Finn's arms tightened around her almost imperceptibly. And you believed him? For about 5 minutes. Then I realized he'd never once asked about my dreams, my goals, what I wanted for my future. Aurora tilted her head to look at Finn in the dim emergency lighting. That's when I decided I was better off alone than with someone who saw me as an accessory to their life instead of a partner in it. His loss, Finn said simply, but the way he said it, with such quiet conviction, made Aurora's chest warm with something deeper than gratitude. What about you? She asked, settling back against his shoulder. What's your heartbreak story? Finn was quiet for so long that Aurora thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice carried years of carefully buried pain. Her name was Claire. We met in art school. She was a sculptor, incredibly talented. We were going to conquer the New York art scene together, live in some cramped studio apartment and create masterpieces while surviving on ramen noodles and dreams. Aurora could hear the wistfulness in his voice, the ghost of younger dreams that had been sacrificed to practical reality. What changed? Graduation. Student loans. The reality that artistic vision doesn't pay rent or buy groceries. Finn's hand stilled in her hair. I took a temporary job at an advertising agency while I looked for gallery representation. Claire said she understood, that it was just until we got established. But it wasn't temporary, Aurora guessed. 6 months turned into a year, then 2 years. I kept telling myself I was building connections, learning the business side of art. But really, I was just scared. Scared of failure, scared of not being good enough, scared of ending up like my father. A brilliant artist who died broke and forgotten. Aurora felt her heart break a little for the young Finn who traded his dreams for security. And Claire? She waited longer than she should have. Kept encouraging me to quit, to take the leap, to trust in our talent and our love. Finn's voice grew rough with emotion. The day I accepted the creative director position at Sterling and Associates, she packed her bags. Said she couldn't watch me disappear into corporate mediocrity one compromise at a time. I'm sorry, Aurora whispered, meaning it completely. I thought she was wrong. I convinced myself that stability was more important than passion, that growing up meant accepting reality instead of chasing impossible dreams. Finn's thumb traced along Aurora's jawline. But lying here with you, talking about things I haven't thought about in years, I'm wondering if maybe she saw something I was too afraid to admit. What's that? That I was using fear as an excuse to stop being brave. That I was choosing safety over authenticity because it was easier than risking everything for what I really wanted. Aurora lifted her head to study Finn's face in the dim light, seeing vulnerability there that took her breath away. And what do you really want? Right now? In this moment? Finn's hands came up to frame her face, his thumbs brushing across her cheekbones. I want to stop being afraid. I want to create art that matters. I want to wake up every morning excited about the work I'm doing instead of counting down the hours until I can escape. He paused, his eyes searching hers with an intensity that made her pulse race. And I want to do all of that with you. Not because you'll complete me or fix me or make me whole, but because you inspire me to be the person I was before I started hiding behind safe choices and corporate suits. Aurora felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes. Finn, I know it's crazy. I know we've known each other for months but really known each other for less than 12 hours. But something about being trapped here with you has shown me what my life could look like if I was brave enough to choose authenticity over security. Before Aurora could respond, before she could tell him that she felt exactly the same terrifying, exhilarating pull toward a future she'd never dared to imagine, Finn was kissing her again. But this kiss was different from their first tentative exploration. This was deeper, more urgent, full of months of suppressed longing and the raw honesty they'd just shared. Aurora melted into him completely, her hands fisting in his shirt as she poured all of her own desperate hope and fear into the connection between them. When Finn's tongue traced along her lower lip, when she opened for him with a soft moan that seemed to echo in the quiet lounge, she felt something fundamental shift inside her chest. This wasn't just attraction anymore. This wasn't just the thrill of forbidden workplace romance or the excitement of being trapped in an unusual situation. This was love, real, complicated, terrifying love that made her want to throw caution to the wind and leap into an unknown future with nothing but faith to guide her. Aurora, Finn breathed against her lips, and her name sounded like a prayer and a promise all at once. I need you to know something. What? She whispered, not pulling away from the warmth of his mouth, not ready to break the spell of intimacy that surrounded them. I've been sketching you for months. Not just your face, but moments, the way you look when you're passionate about an idea, the way you tilt your head when you're listening intently, the way you smile when you think no one's watching. His confession came out in a rush, like he'd been holding it in for too long. I have a whole sketchbook full of you, Aurora. You've been living in my art since the day you walked into that conference room and challenged my entire campaign concept. Aurora pulled back to look at him, stunned by the revelation. You've been drawing me? For months? I tried to stop. I told myself it was unprofessional, inappropriate, borderline stalkerish. But I couldn't help myself. He struggled for words, his artist's vocabulary failing him. You're the most beautiful subject I've ever wanted to capture, and not just physically. There's something about your energy, your intelligence, the way you light up when you're in your element. I wanted to preserve all of that somehow. I want to see them, Aurora said suddenly, surprising them both with her boldness. The sketches. I want to see myself through your eyes. Finn's expression grew uncertain. They're in my office. And we're kind of trapped up here until morning. Then show me when we get out of here, Aurora said, and the way she said, when, instead of, if, felt like making a promise about their future together. Will you do that? Show me how you see me. If you want me to, Finn said, though his voice suggested he was terrified by the prospect of such vulnerability. I do want that. I want to see all the parts of yourself you've been hiding. Aurora settled back into his arms, feeling bolder now, more certain of what she was choosing. I want to know the artist behind the creative director. I want to understand what makes you create, what inspires you, what keeps you awake at night. You keep me awake at night, Finn admitted with a self-conscious laugh. Thinking about conversations we've had, wondering what you're doing when you leave the office, imagining what it would feel like to hold you exactly like this. Aurora felt heat bloom in her cheeks and other places she didn't want to examine too closely. I think about you too, she confessed. More than I should. More than is probably healthy for maintaining professional boundaries. What do you think about? Finn's voice was lower now, rougher, and Aurora could feel the change in his body beneath her, the way his breathing had quickened slightly. I think about your hands, she said honestly, surprised by her own boldness. The way you gesture when you're explaining a concept, the way you hold your pencil when you're sketching, the way they might feel. She trailed off, suddenly shy about finishing the thought. The way they might feel touching you. Finn supplied gently, and when Aurora nodded, he lifted one hand to demonstrate, his fingers tracing along her collarbone where it was exposed by the neckline of her blouse. Aurora's breath hitched at the contact, at the way such a simple touch could send electricity racing through her entire nervous system. Yes, she whispered. Like that. I think about touching you all the time, Finn admitted, his fingers continuing their exploration, tracing patterns across her skin that made her want to arch into his touch like a cat seeking warmth. I think about what your skin would feel like, what sounds you might make, what it would be like to know you completely. The air between them had shifted again, becoming charged with a different kind of electricity. Aurora could feel her body responding to Finn's confession, to the reverent way he was touching her, to the growing awareness that they were alone here for hours yet with no one to interrupt them, no professional obligations to return to, nothing but time and honesty and the magnetic pull that had been building between them for months. "Finn," she said, his name coming out breathier than she'd intended. "I know this is moving fast," he said, seeming to read her thoughts. "I know we should probably slow down, take time to think about what this means, consider the implications. Do you want to slow down?" Aurora asked, and she was amazed by how calm her voice sounded when her heart was racing like she'd run a marathon. "No," Finn admitted, his honesty brutal and beautiful. "I want to keep talking to you until the sun comes up. I want to learn everything about you, your childhood, your dreams, your fears, what makes you laugh until your sides hurt. And then I want to kiss you until we're both dizzy with it." Aurora felt something warm and golden unfurl in her chest at his words. "What's stopping you?" "Nothing," Finn said, and leaned down to capture her lips with his again. This time, Aurora was ready for the intensity of their connection. She met his passion with her own, her hands tangling in his hair, pulling him closer as if she could somehow merge their bodies into one being. When Finn's hands moved to the small of her back, pulling her more securely against him, Aurora felt herself melting into his warmth and strength and the promise of something she'd never dared to hope for. The emergency lighting cast everything in a dreamlike glow as they explored this new territory together, hands roaming over clothes that suddenly felt like barriers, lips meeting and separating and meeting again with increasing urgency. Aurora had never felt so completely present in her own body, so aware of every sensation, every point of contact, every whispered endearment that Finn murmured against her skin. "You're so beautiful," he said, his lips trailing along her jaw to the sensitive spot just below her ear. "So intelligent and strong and absolutely perfect." Aurora's response was lost in a gasp as Finn found a particularly sensitive spot at the base of her throat. She felt like she was coming alive under his touch, like she'd been sleepwalking through her life until this moment when Finn's hands and lips were teaching her what it meant to be fully, completely awake. "I want you," she whispered against his ear, the admission torn from somewhere deep inside her. "I want all of you, your brilliant mind and your artist's soul and this body that's been driving me crazy every time you walk into a meeting." Finn pulled back to look at her, his eyes dark with desire and something deeper, something that looked like reverence. "Are you sure? Because once we cross that line, Aurora, there's no going back. Everything changes." "It's already changed," Aurora said, reaching up to trace the line of his jaw, feeling the slight roughness of stubble against her palm. "The moment you kissed me, the moment I kissed you back, everything changed. I can't pretend to be just your colleague anymore, Finn. I can't pretend I don't feel this." "What do you feel?" he asked, his voice rough with emotion. Aurora took a deep breath, gathering her courage for the most honest thing she'd ever said to another human being. "I feel like I've been waiting my entire life for you without knowing it. I feel like every relationship I've ever had was just preparation for understanding how right this is. I feel like you see me, really see me, in a way no one ever has before." The smile that spread across Finn's face was radiant with joy and relief and love so pure it took Aurora's breath away. "I see you," he confirmed, his hands coming up to frame her face. "I see your brilliance and your strength and your vulnerability. I see the way you try to hide how much you care because you're afraid of being hurt. I see the dreams you've put aside because they felt too risky, too impractical. What else do you see?" Aurora asked, though she wasn't sure she was brave enough to hear the answer. "I see a woman who's been told she has to choose between success and love, and I see how wrong they all were. I see someone who doesn't need to be completed or fixed or saved, you just need to be cherished exactly as you are." Aurora felt tears spill over at his words, at the acceptance and adoration in his voice. "I love you," she said, the words spilling out before she could stop them. "I love you, and it terrifies me, and I don't care because it's the truest thing I've ever felt. I love you too, Finn said, his own voice thick with emotion. I love your mind and your ambition and the way you challenge me to be better. I love that you make me want to create again, really create, not just produce corporate marketing materials but art that means something. They came together again in a kiss that was both celebration and promise, both gratitude and desire. Aurora felt herself surrendering completely to the sensation of being loved exactly as she was, flaws and fears and professional ambitions all included. For the first time in her adult life, she wasn't trying to be anyone other than herself, and the freedom of it was intoxicating. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Aurora rested her forehead against Finn's and smiled through her tears. So what happens now? She asked. Now, Finn said, his thumb brushing away her tears, we have about 5 more hours until rescue arrives. And I intend to spend every minute of that time falling deeper in love with you. That sounds perfect, Aurora said, and meant it completely. As the night deepened around them, as the emergency lighting dimmed to conserve power, Aurora and Finn talked and kissed and held each other like they were the only two people left in the world. They shared childhood memories and professional dreams, fears and hopes and all the small details that make up a life. Aurora told Finn about her mother's strength and sacrifice, about learning early that love often meant loss but choosing to believe anyway. Finn shared stories about his father's paintings, about growing up in a house filled with beautiful, unsellable art and learning that passion didn't always pay the bills but was essential for the soul anyway. They discovered they both loved old movies and jazz music, that they both dreamed of traveling to small Italian towns where art mattered more than profit margins. They learned that they shared the same favorite coffee shop near the office, that they'd probably passed each other on the street dozens of times before their first day at Sterling and Associates. Do you think we would have found each other anyway? Aurora asked as dawn began to creep around the edges of the security shutters. If we hadn't worked together, if this security malfunction hadn't happened, do you think we still would have ended up here? I'd like to think so, Finn said, his arms tightening around her. I'd like to believe that some connections are inevitable, that some people are meant to find each other no matter what. Aurora smiled against his chest, feeling peaceful and complete in a way she'd never experienced before. I like believing that too. As the building began to show signs of life around them, distant sounds of early morning maintenance crews, the hum of elevators coming back online in other parts of the complex, Aurora felt a flutter of anxiety about returning to the real world. How were they supposed to go back to being colleagues after this? How were they supposed to pretend professional distance when she now knew exactly how Finn's laugh sounded when he was truly happy, when she'd memorized the way his hands felt threading through her hair? Hey, Finn said softly, seeming to sense her growing tension. Whatever happens when we leave here, whatever complications we have to navigate, we'll figure it out together. Okay? Aurora nodded, drawing strength from his certainty. Together, she agreed. But even as she said it, even as she chose trust over fear, Aurora couldn't shake the feeling that their night of perfect honesty and connection was about to collide with a world that wouldn't understand or accept what they'd found together. The real test wasn't whether they could fall in love in isolation, it was whether their love could survive the harsh light of professional scrutiny and corporate politics. Only one way to find out, Aurora thought as the first sounds of their rescue team echoed through the building. Time to see if love really could conquer all the practical reasons why they shouldn't be together. She just hoped they were both brave enough to fight for what they discovered in the darkness. Chapter 4. The sound of voices in the hallway and the mechanical whir of systems coming back online shattered the intimate cocoon that Aurora and Finn had built around themselves through the long night. Aurora felt Finn's arms tighten around her reflexively, both of them reluctant to let the outside world intrude on what they'd discovered together. Looks like our rescue party has arrived, Finn said softly, but he made no move to release her from his embrace. Aurora buried her face against his chest for one more moment, breathing in his scent and trying to memorize the feeling of being completely safe and loved and understood. I'm not ready, she whispered. I'm not ready to share you with the world yet. Mr. Cole? Ms. Banks? Noah Fleming's voice echoed through the halls, followed by another voice Aurora didn't recognize, presumably Jerome Danford, the IT manager who would restore their freedom and end their perfect isolation. "We're here," Finn called back, his voice reluctantly shifting back to professional tones even as his hands continued to stroke Aurora's hair with tender familiarity. They had perhaps 3 minutes to make themselves presentable before Fleming and Jerome would find them. Aurora sat up reluctantly, immediately missing the warmth of Finn's arms, and tried to assess the damage to her appearance. Her hair was completely disheveled, her lips were swollen from hours of kissing, and her blouse was wrinkled beyond repair. She looked exactly like a woman who'd spent the night making love, which, in every way that mattered, she had. "How do I look?" she asked, attempting to finger-comb her hair into some semblance of order. "Beautiful," Finn said immediately, his eyes soft with love and memory. "Absolutely radiant. But maybe a little too radiant for Monday morning at the office." Aurora laughed despite her anxiety, using Finn's suit jacket, which she was still wearing, to shield herself as she tried to restore some professional dignity to her appearance. Finn ran his hands through his own hair and straightened his shirt, but there was nothing he could do about the way his eyes kept tracking Aurora's every movement, or the satisfied smile that played at the corners of his mouth. "We need to be careful," Aurora said, her practical mind already cataloging the potential complications they were about to face. "People are going to notice if we walk out of here looking like we spent the night making love to each other?" Finn supplied gently. Aurora felt heat rise in her cheeks at his directness, but she nodded. "The office gossip mill is vicious enough without giving them actual ammunition. So what do you suggest?" Finn asked, though his tone made it clear he'd follow her lead on navigating the professional minefield they were about to enter. "We act professional. Grateful to be rescued, tired from an uncomfortable night on office furniture, but professional." Aurora paused, studying his face. "Can you do that? Can you pretend you don't want to kiss me senseless right now?" Finn's smile was wicked and full of promise. "It's going to be the hardest acting job of my life, but yes. I can be professional. For now." The sound of footsteps approaching made them both straighten, slipping into the professional personas they'd worn for months before last night had changed everything. But Aurora could see the love in Finn's eyes, could feel the connection humming between them like a live wire, and she knew that no amount of professional distance could disguise what had happened between them from anyone who looked closely enough. Jerome Danford turned out to be a cheerful man in his 50s who apologized profusely for the system malfunction while explaining the technical details that had caused their overnight imprisonment. Noah Fleming looked relieved to see them both unharmed, though Aurora caught him glancing curiously between her and Finn, perhaps noting something different in their body language. "The elevators are back online, and all security protocols have been reset," Jerome explained as he led them toward the elevator bank. "Sorry for the inconvenience, folks. These old buildings sometimes have minds of their own." As they rode down in the elevator, the same elevator where Aurora and Finn had first felt that electric awareness of each other, Aurora found herself hyper-aware of Finn's presence beside her, of the way he kept stealing glances at her when he thought no one was looking, of the secret they now shared. The memory of his hands in her hair, of the way he'd whispered her name like a prayer, of the promises they'd made in the darkness, felt almost too large to contain within the confines of professional behavior. How were they supposed to go back to being just colleagues after everything that had happened between them? When the elevator doors opened onto the lobby, revealing the normal bustle of a Monday morning, Aurora felt a moment of disorientation. The world had continued spinning while she and Finn had fallen in love, and now she had to figure out how to integrate this new reality into her carefully ordered life. "Ms. Banks?" Jerome was holding the elevator door open, waiting for her to exit. "Sorry," Aurora murmured, stepping out into the lobby on legs that felt suddenly unsteady. Finn was right behind her, and as they walked toward the building's main entrance, he caught her elbow gently, a touch so brief that anyone watching would think it was accidental, but Aurora felt the electricity of it race up her arm like lightning. 7 o'clock, he said quietly, so only she could hear. That little Italian place on 42nd Street. You know the one? Aurora nodded, not trusting her voice. The restaurant where they'd had their first real date felt like a lifetime ago, though it had been less than 24 hours since they'd sat across from each other and pretended they were just colleagues sharing a meal. And Aurora? Finn's thumb brushed across her elbow in a touch so brief it might have been accidental. Thank you for last night. For letting me see who you really are. Then he was walking away toward his own car, leaving Aurora standing in the Manhattan morning sunlight, still wearing his jacket, still feeling the echo of his touch on her skin, still wondering how one night could change everything about the way she saw herself and her possibilities. The drive home passed in a blur of replayed conversations and remembered touches. Aurora's apartment, which had always been her sanctuary, felt strangely empty after spending the night wrapped in Finn's arms. She stood in her shower, letting hot water wash away the physical evidence of their time together, but nothing could erase the memory of Finn's lips on hers or the way he'd looked at her when he said he loved her. She chose her outfit for the day with unusual care, a sharp burgundy suit that made her feel powerful and confident, armor against whatever challenges the day might bring. But as she applied her makeup and styled her hair back into its professional perfection, Aurora caught herself wondering what Finn would think of the transformation, whether he'd miss the woman with tousled hair and kiss-swollen lips who'd fallen asleep in his arms. Sterling and Associates buzzed with Monday morning energy when Aurora arrived, and she could tell immediately that news of the security malfunction had spread. The story had clearly grown in the telling. Several colleagues mentioned the incident with varying degrees of curiosity and concern. Heard you and Cole had quite an adventure, said Marcus Chen from the junior associate pool, his tone suggesting he thought their overnight stay had been some kind of romantic escapade planned for mutual entertainment. System malfunction, Aurora replied coolly, using the same tone she'd employ to discuss quarterly projections. Nothing exciting about being trapped in a building with no climate control. But even as she deflected the office gossip, Aurora found herself scanning the hallways for Finn, her body hyper-aware of his potential proximity in a way that felt both thrilling and dangerous. When she finally spotted him near the coffee station, looking perfectly professional in a charcoal gray suit, her heart lurched with longing so intense it took her breath away. Finn was talking with Cameron O'Leary, and both men looked up when they saw her approaching. Aurora watched Finn's eyes darken slightly as they met hers, watched the way his gaze flickered almost imperceptibly to her lips before he caught himself and smiled with careful professionalism. "Aurora!" Cameron called out with his usual enthusiasm. "I hear you and Finn had a slumber party in the executive lounge. Did you at least raid the good snacks?" Aurora felt heat rise in her cheeks at Cameron's innocent teasing, but before she could respond, Finn stepped in smoothly. "We managed to find some leftover Chinese food," he said, his voice perfectly neutral. "Though I definitely don't recommend spending the night on office furniture." "I don't know," Cameron said with a laugh. "Sounds romantic to me. Trapped together, all alone, nothing but time to get to know each other better." "Cameron," Aurora said sharply, and the junior associate had the grace to look slightly abashed. Sorry. I'm just saying, if I were going to be trapped anywhere overnight, the executive lounge wouldn't be the worst place." When Cameron finally wandered off to spread his version of events to other willing listeners, Aurora and Finn were left alone by the coffee station. The air between them crackled with awareness and barely suppressed desire, and Aurora had to resist the urge to reach out and straighten Finn's tie, to let her fingers linger against his chest the way they had in the darkness. "How are you feeling?" Finn asked quietly, his voice pitched low enough that anyone passing by would think they were discussing work. "Like I'm living in an alternate reality," Aurora admitted, adding sugar to her coffee just to have something to do with her hands. "You?" "Same." Finn moved closer, ostensibly to reach for the coffee pot, but Aurora caught a hint of his cologne and felt her pulse quicken with memory. "Any regrets?" Aurora looked up at him, seeing the vulnerability in his hazel eyes despite his professional demeanor, the fear that maybe the harsh light of Monday morning had changed her mind about everything they'd shared. "None," she said firmly, her voice barely above a whisper. "You?" The smile that spread across Finn's face was subtle but radiant. "Not a single one," he murmured, and Aurora felt something warm and bright unfurl in her chest at his certainty. "Ms. Banks? Mr. Cole?" The voice belonged to Monique Bennett, the HR director, and both Aurora and Finn turned toward her with expressions that Aurora hoped looked more professional than guilty. Monique's timing couldn't have been worse, or more suspicious. "Could I speak with both of you for a moment?" Monique's tone was pleasant but firm, the kind of voice that didn't really offer an option to decline. Aurora's stomach dropped to somewhere around her knees. Had someone already reported their changed dynamic? Had the office gossip mill reached Monique's ears with record speed? She exchanged a quick glance with Finn, seeing her own concern reflected in his eyes. "Of course," Aurora said, proud of how steady her voice sounded despite the anxiety clawing at her throat. Monique's office was decorated in soothing blues and greens, designed to make difficult conversations feel less confrontational. Aurora had been here before for routine HR matters, but sitting across from Monique's desk with Finn beside her felt like being called to the principal's office. "I heard about the security incident last night," Monique began, her expression professionally concerned. "I wanted to check in with both of you, make sure you're feeling all right after what must have been a stressful experience." "We're fine," Finn said, and Aurora nodded in agreement. "Jerome got everything sorted out this morning." "Good, good." Monique made a note on her pad, and Aurora noticed the way her eyes flickered between them, as if she was cataloging their body language, their proximity, the subtle tension that hummed in the air between them. "I also wanted to remind you both of our policies regarding workplace relationships," Monique continued, and Aurora felt her heart stop beating entirely. "Not that I'm suggesting anything inappropriate happened, of course, but sometimes unusual circumstances can create complicated situations." Aurora felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment and something that might have been shame. Were their feelings for each other that obvious? Had one night of honesty already destroyed their professional reputations? "I'm not sure I understand what you're implying," Aurora said, falling back on the cool professionalism that had served her well in difficult situations. "I'm not implying anything," Monique replied smoothly. "I'm simply doing my due diligence." Sterling and Associates has policies in place regarding romantic relationships between employees, particularly those who work closely together or have supervisory relationships. "There's no supervisory relationship between Ms. Banks and myself," Finn said carefully. "We work on some of the same accounts, but we're in different departments with different reporting structures." "That's correct," Monique acknowledged. "But you do collaborate frequently, and office relationships can create complications even when there's no direct reporting involved." She paused, studying both of their faces with uncomfortable intensity. "I'm simply asking that if your relationship status changes in any way, you inform me immediately. It's for everyone's protection." Aurora wanted to ask what, exactly, they needed protection from, but she bit back the words. Getting defensive would only make things worse, would confirm whatever suspicions Monique already had. "Of course," Aurora said instead. "If there are any changes to report, we'll let you know immediately." "Excellent." Monique's smile was pleasant but professional, giving nothing away. "Now, I believe you both have the Morrison presentation this morning. I won't keep you any longer." As they walked back toward the elevator bank, Aurora felt a cold knot of anxiety forming in her stomach. The real world was already intruding on what had felt like a perfect bubble of possibility, already making their connection feel complicated and potentially problematic. "That went well," Finn said dryly once they were alone in the elevator. "She knows," Aurora said, pressing the button for her floor with more force than necessary. "I don't know how, but she knows something happened between us. Maybe she's just being cautious. It's her job to anticipate problems before they become actual problems." Aurora looked at Finn, seeing her own concerns reflected in his expression despite his attempts to be reassuring. What if this is a mistake? What if we're risking everything we've worked for because we got caught up in an unusual situation? Finn was quiet for a moment, and Aurora's anxiety spiked. Was he having second thoughts? Was the harsh light of Monday morning reality making him reconsider everything they'd shared? Do you think it was a mistake? He asked finally. Aurora thought about the question seriously, weighing her career ambitions against the memory of feeling completely understood and accepted for the first time in her adult life. No, she said. But I'm scared of what it might cost us. The elevator doors opened on Aurora's floor, but before she could step out, Finn caught her hand, a gesture so quick and subtle that anyone watching would have missed it. Whatever it costs, he said quietly, it's worth it. You're worth it. Aurora squeezed his hand, drawing strength from his certainty. 7 o'clock, she reminded him. 7 o'clock, he confirmed, and let her go. The Morrison presentation went better than Aurora could have hoped. Her strategy was flawless, her presentation was polished, and the client seemed genuinely impressed with the campaign concepts. But throughout the entire meeting, Aurora was acutely aware of Finn sitting across the conference table, of the way he nodded approvingly when she made particularly strong points, of the way his creative concepts perfectly complemented her strategic framework. They had always worked well together. But now there was an added dimension to their professional partnership, an undercurrent of personal connection that made their collaboration feel effortless and intuitive in ways that were both thrilling and terrifying. Excellent work, both of you, said Isabella Ashburn as the clients filed out of the conference room. The senior partner's approval was worth its weight in gold, but Aurora noticed the way Isabella's sharp eyes lingered on her and Finn, as if she was seeing something she hadn't noticed before. Thank you, Aurora replied. I think the campaign has real potential to increase their market share significantly. I agree. Finn, your visual concepts were particularly strong. That logo redesign could be revolutionary for their brand identity. Finn accepted the praise with his usual professional grace, but Aurora caught the slight flush of pleasure in his cheeks. She'd noticed before how Finn came alive when discussing his creative work, how his whole demeanor changed when he was talking about visual concepts and design theory. Seeing him in his element, passionate and articulate about his artistic vision, made her fall a little bit more in love with him. The thought should have terrified her. Instead, it filled her with a warm certainty that felt like coming home. As the conference room emptied, Aurora found herself alone with Isabella, who was gathering her materials with the efficient movements of someone who had perfected the art of professional organization. Walk with me, Aurora, Isabella said, and it wasn't really a request. They made their way through the hallways of Sterling and Associates, past offices where Monday morning meetings were in full swing, past the reception area where Caroline was fielding phone calls with her usual competent charm. Isabella didn't speak until they reached her corner office with its impressive view of Manhattan. Sit, Isabella said, settling behind her mahogany desk with the air of someone accustomed to being obeyed. Aurora sat, trying to read Isabella's expression. The senior partner was in her early 50s, with silver-streaked hair always pulled back in a perfect chignon and the kind of sharp intelligence that had earned her a reputation as one of the most formidable women in marketing. She was also notoriously old-fashioned when it came to office relationships, having built her career in an era when women had to choose between professional success and personal happiness. That was an impressive presentation, Isabella began, her tone neutral. The Morrison account could be worth $15 million to this firm if we land it. Thank you. I believe we have a strong chance of securing their business. I believe you're right. Isabella leaned back in her chair, studying Aurora with eyes that missed nothing. Which is why I'm going to give you some advice, woman to woman. Aurora's stomach tightened with apprehension. I'm listening. Office relationships are career killers, Aurora. Particularly for women. Particularly for ambitious women who are up for partner consideration. The words hit Aurora like a physical blow, even though she'd been expecting something like this since Monique's earlier conversation. I'm not sure what you're implying. I'm not implying anything. I'm stating facts. Isabella's voice was crisp and professional. You and Finn Cole have worked together for months without any indication of personal involvement. Then you spend one night trapped in a building together, and suddenly there's a dynamic between you that wasn't there before. Aurora felt heat rise in her cheeks, mortified that their connection was apparently so obvious to anyone who bothered to look. We're colleagues. We work well together. Yes, you do. Which is exactly why getting involved with him would be such a waste. Isabella leaned forward, her expression intense. I've been where you are, Aurora. Young, brilliant, convinced that you can have it all. But the corporate world doesn't reward women who let their personal lives complicate their professional judgment. What are you saying? I'm saying that Finn Cole may be a talented creative director, but he's not worth sacrificing your partnership for. You're one of the most promising strategists I've seen in 15 years. Don't throw that away for a workplace romance that will burn itself out within 6 months. Aurora felt a flare of anger at Isabella's casual dismissal of what she and Finn had shared. And if it doesn't burn out? What if it's something real? Isabella's laugh was sharp and humorless. Then you'll be the woman who got her promotion because she was sleeping with a colleague, regardless of your actual qualifications. Your work will always be questioned, your motives will always be suspect, and your credibility will be permanently damaged. The brutal honesty of Isabella's words made Aurora's chest tight with panic. She'd worked too hard, sacrificed too much, to let a relationship, even one as meaningful as what she had with Finn, derail her career goals. I appreciate your concern, Aurora said carefully, but my personal life is my own business. Not when it affects the firm. Not when it affects your ability to do your job objectively. Isabella's tone softened slightly, and for a moment, Aurora saw something vulnerable flicker across her features. I'm not saying this to hurt you, Aurora. I'm saying it because I see myself in you, and I don't want you to make the mistakes I made. What mistakes? Isabella was quiet for a long moment, and Aurora saw something painful flash across her eyes before the professional mask slipped back into place. I fell in love with a colleague once. Brilliant man, talented, everything I thought I wanted. I convinced myself we could keep it professional, that our work wouldn't suffer. What happened? I lost the biggest account of my career because I trusted his judgment over my own instincts. The relationship ended 6 months later, but the damage to my reputation lasted years. Isabella's voice was matter-of-fact, but Aurora could hear the old pain underneath. I'm not saying Finn would deliberately sabotage you, but emotions cloud judgment. Always. Aurora left Isabella's office feeling like she'd been struck by lightning. The senior partner's words echoed in her head as she made her way back to her own office, past colleagues who smiled and nodded and had no idea that her entire world had been turned upside down in the span of 24 hours. She closed her office door and sank into her chair, Isabella's warnings warring with the memory of Finn's hands in her hair, his voice whispering that he was falling in love with her. Was Isabella right? Was she about to sacrifice everything she'd worked for because she'd gotten caught up in the romance of an unusual situation? Her phone buzzed with a text from Finn, thinking about you. Can't wait for tonight. Aurora stared at the message, her thumb hovering over the reply button. She could picture him in his office 3 floors up, probably sketching while he waited for her response, maybe drawing her profile from memory the way he had for months without her knowing. Before she could second-guess herself, she typed back, "Me too." But even as she sent the message, Isabella's words continued to echo in her mind, career killer. Particularly for women. Particularly for ambitious women. The rest of the day passed in a blur of meetings and phone calls and routine tasks that felt surreal against the backdrop of Aurora's emotional turmoil. She found herself watching the clock, counting down the hours until 7 o'clock, alternating between excitement and anxiety about seeing Finn again. She changed clothes 3 times before settling on a deep burgundy dress that hugged her curves in all the right places, paired with heels that made her legs look endless. She looked like a woman going to dinner with a man she was falling in love with, not like a corporate strategist making a calculated networking move. As she applied her lipstick in the ladies' room mirror, Caroline appeared beside her, touching up her own makeup with practiced efficiency. "You look beautiful," Caroline said with genuine warmth. "Hot date?" Aurora paused, her lipstick halfway to her mouth. "Dinner with a friend." Caroline's knowing smile suggested she wasn't fooled. "Well, your friend is very lucky. That dress is stunning on you." "Thank you." Aurora capped her lipstick and turned to face Caroline directly. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course, honey." "Do you think office relationships are always a bad idea?" Caroline was quiet for a moment, studying Aurora's face in the fluorescent lighting. "I think," she said finally, "that life is short and love is rare. I think that sometimes the best things happen when we're brave enough to take risks, even when those risks feel terrifying." "But what about careers? Professional reputations? What about happiness?" Caroline countered gently. "What about finding someone who sees you exactly as you are and loves you for it?" She paused, then added, "I've been married to my high school sweetheart for 32 years. We met when we were working at the same summer camp, and everyone said workplace relationships never worked out. They were wrong." Aurora felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes. "What if it ruins everything? What if it makes everything better?" Caroline reached out and squeezed Aurora's hand. "Honey, I've watched you for 2 years. You're brilliant and driven and absolutely fierce when it comes to your career. But you've also been lonely, whether you want to admit it or not. Maybe it's time to let yourself be happy." Aurora left the building with Caroline's words echoing in her mind, warring with Isabella's dire warnings about career suicide and professional reputation. The evening air was crisp and clear, carrying the scent of early autumn and the promise of change, and Aurora found herself walking more slowly than usual, using the time to sort through her conflicted emotions. But as she approached the Italian restaurant where Finn was waiting for her, Aurora felt her doubts begin to fade. Because whatever the risks, whatever the potential consequences, she knew one thing with absolute certainty: she was in love with Finn Cole, and that love was worth fighting for. The question was whether it was worth risking everything else she'd worked so hard to build. Chapter 5. The Italian restaurant felt like stepping into another world, one where corporate politics and professional boundaries didn't exist, where Aurora could simply be a woman meeting the man she loved for dinner. The soft lighting cast everything in golden hues, and the scent of garlic and fresh basil wrapped around her like a warm embrace as she spotted Finn at their corner table. He stood when he saw her, and the smile that spread across his face was like watching the sun break through storm clouds. For a moment, all of Isabella's warnings and Monique's suspicious questions faded into background noise. There was only Finn, looking unfairly handsome in a navy sweater that brought out the green flecks in his hazel eyes, looking at her like she was the answer to every prayer he'd ever whispered. "You look incredible," he said as she approached, leaning in to kiss her cheek in a gesture that felt both natural and thrilling. His lips lingered just a moment longer than strictly appropriate for a collegial dinner, and Aurora felt heat bloom across her skin at the contact. "Thank you." Aurora let him help her with her chair, breathing in his familiar scent and feeling some of the day's tension begin to ease. "This place is lovely. I hoped you'd like it. It's not fancy, but it's real. Authentic." Finn settled across from her, and Aurora was struck again by how different he looked outside the office, more relaxed, more himself somehow. "Like us." The word "us" sent a thrill through Aurora that she tried to hide behind the wine menu. Were they an us now? After one night of confessions and stolen kisses, after a day of navigating suspicious HR directors and disapproving senior partners, were they really ready to claim that kind of partnership? They ordered wine and appetizers, falling into conversation that danced carefully around the elephant in the room, namely, what exactly they were doing and how it was going to affect their professional lives. Aurora found herself studying Finn's face in the candlelight, memorizing the way his eyes crinkled when he laughed, the way his hands moved when he talked about his creative projects. "You're quiet tonight," Finn observed over their second glass of wine. "Everything okay?" Aurora debated how much to tell him about her conversation with Isabella, about the warnings and dire predictions about career suicide. In the end, she settled for partial honesty, a skill she'd perfected in the corporate world but one that felt wrong when applied to Finn. "It's been a strange day. Going back to work after last night, trying to act normal when everything feels different." "Different how?" Finn's voice was gentle, but Aurora could see the concern in his eyes, the fear that maybe she was having second thoughts about what they'd shared. "Different like I keep expecting someone to look at me and know exactly what happened between us. Different like I can't concentrate on quarterly projections because I keep thinking about the way you held me while I slept." Aurora paused, then added with a rueful laugh, "Different like I'm a completely different person than I was 48 hours ago." Finn reached across the table and covered her hand with his, the simple contact sending warmth shooting up her arm. "Is that a bad thing?" Aurora looked down at their joined hands, at the way Finn's fingers fit perfectly between hers, at the callus on his index finger from years of holding pencils and brushes. "I don't know. Maybe. People are already talking, Finn. About us being trapped together, about what might have happened. Let them talk. Easy for you to say. You're not up for partner consideration." The words came out sharper than Aurora had intended, and she saw Finn's expression shift, hurt flickering across his features before he could hide it. She immediately regretted her tone, but the fear that Isabella had planted in her mind was growing stronger with each passing hour. "You're right," Finn said quietly, withdrawing his hand. "It is easier for me to say. I don't have as much to lose." Aurora felt terrible for her outburst, for letting Isabella's warnings poison what should have been a perfect evening. "That's not what I meant. No, it's okay. I understand." Finn's voice was carefully neutral, but Aurora could see the walls going back up behind his eyes. "Your career is important to you. It should be. You've worked hard for your success." "Finn, please don't do that. Don't pull away from me because I'm scared." "I'm not pulling away. I'm being realistic." Finn took a sip of his wine, studying her face with an intensity that made her feel exposed. "What did Isabella say to you today?" Aurora's sharp intake of breath was answer enough. "I thought so. She has a reputation for giving that particular speech to ambitious women." Finn's smile was rueful and tinged with old pain. "Let me guess. Career killer, particularly for women who want to be taken seriously?" "Something like that." Aurora felt like Finn could see straight through her fears to the vulnerability underneath. She said emotions cloud judgment. "That I'd never be taken seriously if people thought I got my promotion because of our relationship." "And what do you think?" Aurora was quiet for a long moment, turning the question over in her mind. What did she think, apart from Isabella's warnings and the office gossip and the very real fear that she was about to throw away everything she'd worked for? "I think," she said slowly, "that I've spent my entire adult life being careful. Making safe choices, protecting myself, building walls to keep from getting hurt." She looked up at Finn, seeing her own uncertainty reflected in his hazel eyes. "And I think that maybe, for once in my life, I want to be brave enough to choose something that scares me." The smile that spread across Finn's face was like dawn breaking over the horizon. "Are you sure?" "No," Aurora admitted, feeling lighter just for saying it. "I'm terrified. But I'm more terrified of spending the rest of my life wondering what might have happened if I'd been brave enough to try." Finn's hand found hers again across the table, and this time Aurora didn't hesitate to intertwine their fingers. "So what do we do?" I don't know. Figure it out as we go, I guess. Aurora squeezed his hand, drawing strength from his steady presence. But first, I want to see those paintings you mentioned. The real ones that nobody else has ever seen. Finn's storage unit was exactly what Aurora had expected from a man who'd spent years hiding his artistic soul. A converted warehouse space in Brooklyn filled with canvases that practically vibrated with suppressed creativity and raw emotion. As Finn unlocked the metal door, Aurora felt her pulse quicken with anticipation and something that might have been reverence. I should warn you, Finn said, his hand hesitating on the door handle, these aren't the kind of polished pieces you'd see in a gallery. They're just, honest. Maybe too honest. Finn. Aurora reached up to touch his cheek, feeling the slight roughness of evening stubble against her palm. After everything we shared last night, do you really think there's such a thing as too honest? He looked at her for a long moment, and Aurora could see the battle playing out across his features, the fear of being truly seen warring with the trust they'd built between them. Finally, he pulled the door open, and Aurora's breath caught in her throat. The space was a revelation. Canvases of every size lined the walls and filled improvised easels, each one a window into Finn's hidden soul. There were abstract explosions of color that seemed to pulse with their own energy, hyperrealistic portraits that captured their subjects with devastating intimacy, landscapes that made Aurora feel like she could step into them and disappear into another world entirely. Finn, she whispered, moving deeper into the space like she was entering a cathedral. These are extraordinary. She paused in front of a canvas that showed a woman sitting alone in a coffee shop, her face turned toward a rain-streaked window, and felt her chest tighten with recognition of that particular kind of urban loneliness. Another piece, an abstract that seemed to capture the feeling of standing at the edge of something vast and unknown, made her think of every moment in her life when she'd been too afraid to take a leap of faith. This one, she said, pointing to a painting that looked like hope and terror dancing together in shades of gold and midnight blue. It's like looking at my entire emotional state for the past 24 hours. I painted that after our first team meeting, Finn said quietly, moving to stand beside her. You challenged every assumption I'd made about the campaign, made me realize I'd been playing it safe instead of creating something truly innovative. I felt like I was standing at the edge of a cliff, about to jump into something that might save me or destroy everything I thought I was. Aurora turned to look at him, seeing vulnerability in every line of his body. And did it? Save you or destroy you? I thought it was destroying me, slowly, day by day. Turning me into someone I didn't recognize. Finn moved closer, close enough that Aurora could feel the warmth radiating from his skin. Until I met you. Then I realized maybe it wasn't destruction at all. Maybe it was just change, preparing me to become someone worthy of you. The words hit Aurora like a physical force, making her chest tight with an emotion too big to name. She turned away from the painting to face Finn fully, seeing herself reflected in his eyes, seeing the love there that still terrified and thrilled her in equal measure. Show me more, she said, her voice husky with emotion. Finn led her through his secret gallery, explaining the stories behind each piece, the moments of inspiration or desperation that had driven him to create them. Aurora saw his artistic evolution, the way his technique had developed even as his corporate job consumed more of his time and energy. She saw pain and beauty and raw human truth captured in oil and acrylic and charcoal. And then she saw it. Tucked away in the back corner, partially hidden behind other canvases, was a painting that made her heart stop completely. It was her, not a literal portrait, but something deeper, more essential. Finn had captured her in a moment of pure concentration, her face lit with the passionate intensity she brought to work she cared about, but there was something else there too, a yearning, a loneliness that Aurora barely recognized in herself. When did you paint this? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Finn's cheeks flushed with embarrassment and something that looked like shame. About 2 months ago. I kept thinking about this presentation you gave on consumer psychology, the way you got so animated when you were talking about what motivates people to make emotional connections with brands. You looked luminous. Like you were lit from within. Aurora stared at the painting, seeing herself through Finn's eyes. Not just beautiful, but powerful, brilliant, alive in ways she hadn't even known she was capable of being. It was the most generous, loving interpretation of who she was, and it made her want to cry and laugh and kiss him all at the same time. "I look happy," she said, surprised by the observation. "You were happy. For those 45 minutes while you were presenting, you were completely in your element, completely yourself. I wanted to capture that version of you, the one who wasn't worried about what anyone else thought, who wasn't afraid to be brilliant and passionate and absolutely magnificent." Aurora felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes. "Is that really how you see me?" "That's how you are," Finn said simply. "The fact that you don't always see it yourself doesn't make it any less true." Aurora turned to face him, and suddenly they were standing very close in the dim light of the storage unit, surrounded by the evidence of Finn's hidden artistic soul, the air between them crackling with the same electricity that had been building since their first encounter in the elevator. "Finn," she breathed, and his name sounded like a prayer. "Aurora." His hands came up to frame her face, thumbs tracing along her cheekbones with reverent gentleness. "I need you to know something." "What?" "This isn't just attraction. This isn't just chemistry or proximity or whatever it was that brought us together last night." Finn's voice was steady, certain, full of a conviction that made Aurora's knees weak. "I am completely, irrevocably in love with you. Not just with how you look or how you make me feel, but with who you are, your mind, your ambition, your strength, the way you challenge me to be better than I ever thought I could be." The words hung in the air between them, honest and terrifying and wonderful, and Aurora felt something shift inside her chest, some final wall crumbling under the weight of Finn's absolute certainty. "I love you too," she whispered, and saying it out loud felt like stepping off a cliff and learning to fly all at once. "I love your artist's soul and your gentle strength and the way you see beauty in everything, even in me. Especially in me." "Especially in you," Finn murmured, and then he was kissing her, and Aurora was kissing him back with all the passion and fear and desperate hope she'd been carrying since the moment she'd first looked into his eyes and felt her carefully ordered world begin to spin off its axis. This kiss was different from the ones they'd shared the night before, deeper, more urgent, full of the knowledge that they were choosing each other despite all the complications and risks and potential consequences. Aurora's hands fisted in Finn's sweater, pulling him closer, and when he responded by lifting her until she was sitting on the edge of his work table, surrounded by paint tubes and brushes and the tools of his secret artistic life, she wrapped her legs around his waist and held on like he was the only thing keeping her anchored to the earth. "Aurora," Finn groaned against her lips, his hands tangling in her hair, destroying the careful style she'd spent 20 minutes perfecting. "God, I want you. I want all of you. Your brilliant mind and your fierce heart and this body that drives me absolutely crazy every time you walk into a room." Aurora's response was to pull him closer, to pour all of her own desperate longing into the kiss, to show him with her body what she was still learning to say with words. She could feel the evidence of his desire against her hip, could feel her own body responding with a heat that had nothing to do with the temperature in the storage unit and everything to do with the way Finn was looking at her like she was something miraculous and impossible and absolutely necessary. "I want you too," she whispered against his ear, her lips brushing the sensitive skin just below his jawline. "I want you in ways that terrify me, in ways I've never let myself want anyone." Finn's hands moved to the hem of her dress, fingers tracing along the sensitive skin of her thighs, and Aurora felt her breath hitch at the contact. This was happening too fast and not nearly fast enough, and she was simultaneously desperate for more and terrified of what more might mean. But then Finn's mouth was on her throat, finding that spot that made her gasp and arch against him, and Aurora stopped thinking about anything except the way he was touching her like she was something precious and necessary and perfect exactly as she was. "Wait," she said suddenly, her hands stilling Finn's exploration, not because she wanted him to stop but because she needed him to understand something first. Too fast? Finn asked immediately, his hands moving away from her body, his expression shifting from desire to concern in an instant. We can slow down. We can stop. Whatever you need. Aurora looked at him, really looked at him, and saw not just passion but love, not just want but respect, not just desire but the kind of patience that came from truly caring about someone else's comfort and happiness. It was that patience, that immediate willingness to put her needs before his own, that finally broke through the last of her defenses. Not too fast, she said, reaching up to cup his face in her hands. Just, this is new for me. Not the physical part, but the emotional part. The letting someone see me completely vulnerable part. You don't have to be vulnerable with me all at once, Finn said gently, his hands resting on her waist with careful restraint. We have time. We have all the time in the world. But even as he said it, Aurora could hear the echo of Isabella's warnings, the reminder that their relationship was already being scrutinized, already being questioned. How much time did they really have before the outside world intruded on what they were building together? Do we? She asked, and she wasn't just talking about their immediate situation. Do we really have time, or are we living in a fantasy that's going to crash into reality the moment we walk back into Sterling and Associates tomorrow morning? Finn was quiet for a long moment, his forehead pressed against hers, his breath warm against her lips. I don't know, he admitted with the kind of brutal honesty that made Aurora love him even more. But I know that what we have right now, in this moment, is real. And I know that I'd rather face whatever complications come up than spend the rest of my life wondering what we might have had. Aurora closed her eyes, breathing in the scent of oil paint and turpentine and Finn's cologne, trying to center herself in the midst of all the uncertainty. When she opened them again, she saw Finn watching her with an expression that was equal parts hopeful and terrified. Make love to me, she said quietly, and watched his pupils dilate with desire and something deeper. Here, surrounded by your art, by the most honest pieces of who you are. I want our first time to be someplace that matters to you, someplace real. Finn's response was to kiss her again, slowly this time, reverently, like he was memorizing the taste of her mouth and the way she sighed when his lips moved to the sensitive spot just below her ear. His hands moved with artist's precision, finding the zipper of her dress and sliding it down with careful deliberation, pausing to make sure she was still with him, still wanting this. Aurora's dress pooled around her waist, and she felt a moment of self-consciousness at being so exposed in the harsh fluorescent light of the storage unit. But when she saw the way Finn was looking at her, like she was a masterpiece he'd been privileged to discover, the self-consciousness faded into something warm and golden and absolutely right. Beautiful, he whispered, his hands tracing the curves of her body with the same reverence he might show to a priceless sculpture. You're so beautiful, Aurora. Aurora's response was to reach for the hem of his sweater, pulling it over his head to reveal the lean lines of his torso, the subtle definition of muscles earned through weekend runs rather than gym sessions. She pressed her palms against his chest, feeling his heart racing beneath her touch, and marveled at the way such a simple contact could make her feel so powerfully connected to another human being. They moved together with increasing urgency, hands exploring, lips meeting and separating and meeting again, the storage unit around them fading into irrelevance as they discovered each other's bodies with the same careful attention they'd given to each other's minds and hearts the night before. When Finn finally joined with her, when Aurora felt the exquisite completeness of their connection, she understood for the first time what people meant when they talked about two people becoming one. It wasn't just physical, though the physical was extraordinary, it was emotional, spiritual, a connection that seemed to reach into the deepest parts of who she was and illuminate them with golden light. I love you, Finn whispered against her throat as they moved together, finding a rhythm that felt as natural as breathing, and Aurora felt the words reverberate through her entire being. I love you too, she whispered back, and meant it with every fiber of her being, every cell in her body, every beat of her heart. Afterward, they lay together on the narrow couch Finn kept in the storage unit for long painting sessions, Aurora's head on his chest, his fingers combing through her hair with absent gentleness. The fluorescent light was harsh against their overheated skin, but neither of them seemed inclined to move, to break the spell of intimacy that surrounded them like a cocoon. "No regrets?" Finn asked quietly, echoing his question from that morning, though now it carried the weight of something much more significant than a single kiss. "None," Aurora said firmly, pressing a kiss to the spot where his heart was beating steadily beneath her cheek. "You?" "Only that it took us this long to get here," Finn said, and Aurora could hear the smile in his voice. Aurora smiled against his skin, feeling drowsy and satisfied and more content than she could remember being in years. For the first time since Isabella's warnings that morning, the complications and potential consequences of their relationship felt manageable, like obstacles they could overcome together rather than insurmountable barriers. But as they reluctantly dressed and prepared to leave Finn's artistic sanctuary, Aurora's phone buzzed with a text message that brought reality crashing back with devastating force. It was from Caroline: "Emergency meeting tomorrow morning at 8 a.m. All department heads and senior associates required. Word is Isabella found out about you and Finn. I'm so sorry, honey. She's planning to make an example of you both." Aurora stared at the message, her blood turning to ice in her veins. Beside her, Finn was adjusting his sweater, completely unaware of the bomb that had just exploded in Aurora's hands. "Finn," she said, her voice coming out strained and thin. "What is it?" He looked up, saw her expression, and immediately moved to her side. "Aurora, what's wrong?" She handed him the phone without a word, watching his face as he read Caroline's message, seeing the same dread that was currently eating away at her stomach reflected in his hazel eyes. "This doesn't necessarily mean anything catastrophic," Finn said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Emergency meetings happen. Maybe it's about the Morrison account, or budget allocations, or, it's about us, Finn." Aurora sank onto the couch they'd been sharing just moments before, their romantic afterglow completely destroyed by the harsh intrusion of corporate politics and professional consequences. "Isabella knows, and she's going to destroy us both." Aurora put her head in her hands, trying to think clearly through the fog of fear and regret that was threatening to overwhelm her. She could see her entire career flashing before her eyes. Years of hard work, carefully built relationships, the partnership she'd been working toward since the day she'd started at Sterling and Associates. "Maybe I should have listened to her," Aurora said, her voice muffled by her hands. "Maybe I should have stayed away from you, kept things professional. Now I've probably destroyed both our careers for one night of, don't." Finn's voice was sharp enough to cut through her spiral of self-recrimination. "Don't you dare diminish what we have together. This wasn't one night of anything. This is love, Aurora. Real, honest, transformative love. And that's worth fighting for." Aurora looked up at him, seeing the fierce determination in his expression, the way his jaw was set with stubborn resolve. "Is it worth our jobs? Our reputations? Everything we've worked for?" "Yes," Finn said without hesitation, kneeling in front of her and taking her hands in his. "It's worth all of that and more. Because without you, none of the rest of it matters. Success means nothing if I don't have someone I love to share it with." The absolute certainty in his voice made Aurora's chest tight with emotion. She wanted to believe him, wanted to have his confidence that love could conquer all the practical realities they were about to face. But years of watching her mother make similar choices, heart over head, love over security, only to end up disappointed and alone had taught Aurora that fairy tale endings were for other people. "What if you're wrong?" she whispered. "What if we lose everything and it still doesn't work out between us? What if the pressure destroys what we have?" Finn's hands tightened around hers, his thumbs tracing across her knuckles in a gesture that was becoming familiar and comforting. "Then at least we'll know we tried. At least we'll know we were brave enough to choose love over fear, even when it was terrifying." Aurora stared into his eyes, seeing her own fear reflected there but also seeing something else. A steadfast devotion that made her believe, for just a moment, that maybe they could survive whatever Isabella Ashburn had planned for them. "Together?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Together," Finn confirmed, bringing her hands to his lips and pressing a kiss to her knuckles. "Whatever happens tomorrow, whatever Isabella throws at us, we face it together. As partners. As equals. As two people who love each other enough to fight for what we have." Aurora felt some of her panic begin to subside, replaced by a different kind of fear, not the paralyzing terror of losing everything, but the energizing fear that came with choosing to fight for something that mattered more than safety or security or conventional wisdom. "Okay," she said, and was surprised by how steady her voice sounded. "Okay. We fight." As they locked up the storage unit and made their way back into the city, Aurora felt something shift inside her chest. She was still terrified of what tomorrow might bring, still worried about the professional consequences of choosing love over career strategy. But she was also, for the first time in her adult life, completely certain that she was making the right choice. Whatever Isabella had planned for them, whatever weapons she intended to use against their relationship, Aurora knew one thing with absolute clarity: she wasn't going to give up Finn without a fight. Not when she'd finally found someone who saw her as she truly was and loved her not in spite of her ambitions but because of them. Tomorrow, she was going to find out whether love really could conquer all. And she was going to find out with Finn's hand in hers, facing the storm together instead of weathering it alone. It was, Aurora thought as they walked through the Brooklyn evening toward whatever uncertain future awaited them, the most terrifying and exhilarating decision she'd ever made. And she wouldn't change a single moment of it. Chapter 6. The next morning arrived with all the subtlety of an impending execution. Aurora had barely slept, her mind cycling endlessly between replaying every tender moment with Finn and imagining worst-case scenarios for the emergency meeting. She'd chosen her most powerful armor, a midnight black suit that made her look untouchable and formidable, as if expensive fabric could somehow shield her from whatever professional assassination Isabella had planned. She arrived at Sterling and Associates 30 minutes early, her coffee untouched and her stomach churning with anxiety. The building felt different somehow, charged with the kind of predatory energy that preceded corporate bloodshed. Aurora noticed clusters of employees whispering in corners, their conversations dying abruptly when she passed, their eyes following her with a mixture of curiosity and something that looked disturbingly like pity. Caroline was already at her desk, her usual cheerful demeanor replaced by grim determination. When she saw Aurora, her expression softened with maternal concern. "Morning, sweetheart," Caroline said quietly, glancing around to ensure they weren't being overheard. "How are you holding up?" "I've had better days," Aurora admitted, setting down her untouched coffee with hands that trembled slightly. "Any idea what we're walking into?" Caroline's face darkened. "Word is that someone saw you and Finn leaving the building together last night. And not in a colleagues sharing a cab kind of way." She leaned closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Isabella's been making calls since 6 a.m. She's brought in Victor Kellerman from the legal department." Aurora felt the blood drain from her face. Victor Kellerman was Sterling and Associates' most ruthless corporate attorney, known for making troublesome employees disappear with surgical precision. Legal? What could they possibly need legal for? Contract violations, morality clauses, professional conduct standards, take your pick. Caroline's expression was fierce with protective anger. "I've seen this play before, honey. She's going to try to make you choose between your career and your happiness, and she's going to make it as humiliating as possible." Aurora made her way to the conference room feeling like she was walking to her own trial. The space was already filling with department heads and senior associates, their expressions ranging from professional curiosity to barely concealed anticipation. Aurora chose a seat near the middle of the table, trying to project confidence despite the fact that her heart was beating so hard she was sure everyone could hear it. Finn arrived exactly at 8 o'clock, looking devastatingly handsome in a charcoal suit that emphasized his artistic elegance. He caught Aurora's eye across the room, and for just a moment, his professional mask slipped enough to show her the love and determination burning beneath the surface. That brief connection gave Aurora the strength she needed to lift her chin and meet whatever was coming with dignity. Isabella entered with the theatrical timing of a general preparing for battle, flanked by Victor Kellerman and Monique Bennett. The senior partner was immaculate as always, but there was something predatory in her smile that made Aurora's skin crawl with apprehension. "Thank you all for accommodating this emergency meeting," Isabella began, her voice cutting through the nervous energy in the room like a blade. "I've called you here to address a situation that has come to my attention, one that threatens the very foundation of what we've built at Sterling and Associates." Aurora felt her mouth go dry. The way Isabella was framing this, you'd think she and Finn had committed corporate espionage instead of falling in love. "It has been brought to my attention that certain employees have been engaging in behavior that not only violates company policy but undermines the professional integrity that our clients trust us to maintain." Isabella's gaze swept the room before landing squarely on Aurora and Finn. "I want to be absolutely clear about Sterling and Associates' position on this matter." The silence in the room was suffocating. Aurora could feel the weight of 20 pairs of eyes on her, could sense the mixture of sympathy and schadenfreude irradiating from her colleagues. Any employee who allows personal relationships to interfere with their professional responsibilities will find their position at this firm terminated immediately, Isabella continued, her voice growing colder with each word. "We have worked too hard to build our reputation to allow it to be compromised by individuals who cannot maintain appropriate boundaries." Aurora felt heat rise in her cheeks, not from embarrassment, but from anger. The way Isabella was speaking about their relationship, you'd think it was some sordid affair instead of two people falling genuinely in love. "Furthermore," Isabella said, her smile turning razor-sharp, "any employee who believes they can use personal relationships to advance their career or gain preferential treatment will discover that such tactics not only have consequences, they have legal ramifications." Victor Kellerman stepped forward with the practiced ease of a shark scenting blood. "The contracts each of you signed upon joining Sterling and Associates include explicit morality clauses regarding professional conduct. Violations of these clauses constitute grounds for immediate termination and potential legal action regarding breach of contract." Aurora felt the room spinning slightly. They weren't just threatening her job, they were threatening to destroy her professionally, to make sure she could never work in marketing again. "Now," Isabella continued, her voice taking on a tone of false benevolence, "I understand that sometimes people make mistakes. Sometimes they allow emotions to cloud their judgment. Which is why I'm prepared to offer a one-time opportunity for redemption." She turned to face Aurora directly, and Aurora could see the cold calculation in her eyes. "Ms. Banks, you are an exceptionally talented strategist. Your work on the Morrison account was exemplary. I would hate to see such promise wasted due to a momentary lapse in judgment." Isabella paused dramatically. "I'm prepared to overlook this unfortunate situation entirely, provided you demonstrate your commitment to professional standards going forward." Aurora's heart sank as she realized what was coming next. "Effective immediately, you will be transferred to our Los Angeles office to head up the West Coast division. It's a promotion, actually, senior partner track, significant salary increase, your own team to manage." Isabella's smile was triumphant. "All you have to do is accept the transfer and put this unfortunate episode behind you." The room was so quiet Aurora could hear her own heartbeat thundering in her ears. She could feel Finn's eyes on her, could sense his shock and pain even without looking at him. Isabella was offering her everything she'd ever wanted professionally, and the price was walking away from the man she loved. "And Mr. Cole," Isabella continued, turning her attention to Finn, "will be reassigned to our Chicago office, also effective immediately. A lateral move, but one that will allow him to reset his priorities. Separate them by 3,000 miles. Make it impossible for them to maintain their relationship. Force Aurora to choose between her career dreams and her heart, knowing that most ambitious women would choose the career. Most women. But not Aurora. Aurora stood up. The action was so unexpected that several people actually gasped. Isabella's eyes narrowed dangerously, but Aurora was beyond caring about political ramifications or professional consequences. "Excuse me," Aurora said, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. "I have something to say. Ms. Banks, this is not the appropriate forum for, with respect, Isabella, if you're going to destroy my reputation publicly, I think I have the right to defend it publicly." Aurora's voice carried the authority she'd spent years developing, the confidence that had earned her recognition as one of the firm's most talented strategists. The room held its collective breath. Even Isabella seemed momentarily stunned by Aurora's boldness. "You're absolutely right that Sterling and Associates has worked hard to build its reputation," Aurora continued, moving around the table so she was standing directly across from Isabella. "A reputation built on brilliant strategists and creative directors who produce exceptional work for our clients. Work that I have consistently delivered, regardless of my personal life. Your personal life becomes the firm's business when it affects your professional judgment," Isabella shot back. "Affects my judgment?" Aurora's laugh was sharp with disbelief. "The Morrison presentation that you praised yesterday was developed through collaboration between Finn's creative vision and my strategic framework. The same collaboration that has won us 4 major accounts in the past 6 months, bringing in over $20 million in revenue." Aurora could see approval flickering in some of her colleagues' faces, could sense the mood in the room shifting as people remembered her track record, her consistent excellence. "If that's compromised judgment," Aurora continued, her voice growing stronger with each word, "then I'd hate to see what you consider successful." Victor Kellerman stepped forward, his expression coldly professional. "Ms. Banks, you're in violation of your employment contract. I strongly advise you to accept Ms. Ashburn's generous offer and avoid making this situation worse for yourself." "Worse for myself?" Aurora turned to face the legal shark, her eyes blazing with fury. "You mean worse than being treated like I'm some calculating gold digger who slept her way to success? Worse than having my professional accomplishments attributed to my personal relationships instead of my actual talent?" She turned back to face the room, making eye contact with each of her colleagues in turn. "Yes, Finn Cole and I are in a relationship. Yes, we work together on accounts. And yes, our work together is stronger because we understand and respect each other both professionally and personally." Aurora's voice rang with conviction. "I won't apologize for falling in love with a man who sees my ambition as an asset rather than a threat, who celebrates my success instead of feeling diminished by it." The room was electric with tension. Aurora could feel Finn's love and pride radiating across the space, could see the shock and admiration in her colleagues' faces. "Furthermore," Aurora continued, her voice cutting through the silence like steel, "I find it interesting that in all your talk about professional integrity and morality clauses, no one has mentioned the most relevant policy of all." "Which is?" Isabella's voice was dangerously quiet. Aurora turned to Monique Bennett, who had been standing silently beside Isabella throughout the entire confrontation. "Monique, could you please remind everyone of our actual policy regarding workplace relationships?" Monique straightened, her expression shifting from passive observer to active participant. "Sterling and Associates has no prohibition against relationships between employees of equal standing who work in different departments. Our policy requires disclosure and prohibits supervisory conflicts of interest." The room buzzed with murmured conversations. Aurora saw several colleagues exchanging glances, clearly reassessing the situation. "Ms. Banks and Mr. Cole work in different departments," Monique continued, her voice growing stronger. "They have no supervisory relationship. They've disclosed their relationship status as required. And their professional performance has been exemplary both individually and collaboratively." Isabella's face was rapidly turning red. "Monique, that's enough," actually, I don't think it is enough." Monique's voice carried surprising steel. "I've been reviewing our policies extensively since yesterday, and I've discovered something troubling. We've been operating under outdated assumptions about workplace relationships that have no basis in our actual employee handbook." Aurora felt a surge of hope mixed with disbelief. Was Monique actually defending them? "What's more," Monique continued, "I think Aurora makes an excellent point about outdated attitudes toward professional women. Sterling and Associates prides itself on being a progressive company that attracts top talent. Perhaps it's time our leadership reflected that progressiveness." The murmur of conversations grew louder. Aurora could see the tide turning, could feel the room's energy shifting away from Isabella's narrative of scandal and moral failure toward something more complex and nuanced. But Isabella Ashburn hadn't become a senior partner by backing down from fights. "This is all very interesting," Isabella said, her voice dripping with contempt, "but it doesn't change the fundamental issue. Ms. Banks has demonstrated that her personal feelings override her professional judgment. She's publicly embarrassed this firm with her behavior." "Have I?" Aurora asked, her voice dangerously quiet. "Or have you embarrassed this firm by treating two of your most successful employees like criminals for falling in love?" Before Isabella could respond, another voice cut through the tension. "Actually, I think Aurora has a point." Everyone turned to stare at James Morrison himself, who had apparently been standing in the doorway observing the entire confrontation. The billionaire client looked impeccably composed despite having just witnessed what amounted to a corporate civil war. "Mr. Morrison," Isabella stammered, her composure finally cracking. "I wasn't aware you were." "I came by to discuss the final details of our contract," Morrison said pleasantly, walking into the room with the easy confidence of someone worth several $1 billion. "But I couldn't help overhearing your discussion." Aurora felt her world tilt on its axis. Of all the possible witnesses to her career-ending stand, their biggest client hadn't been on the list. "I have to say," Morrison continued, his gaze moving between Aurora and Finn, "I'm impressed. The campaign these two created for my company was brilliant precisely because it understood authentic human connection. Now I see why." He turned to face Isabella directly. "The passion and partnership I just witnessed? That's exactly what I want representing my brand. Ms. Banks, Mr. Cole, your contract with Morrison Industries just doubled. I want that authentic collaboration on all my accounts." The room was so quiet Aurora could hear her own heartbeat. James Morrison had just validated everything she'd risked, everything she'd fought for. "Furthermore," Morrison continued, "I'll be recommending your team to several other CEOs in my network. Authentic partnership is rare in this business. When you find it, you don't destroy it, you celebrate it." Isabella looked like she'd been struck by lightning. Aurora felt Finn's hand slip into hers under the table, warm and strong and absolutely right. "A mess." "Ashburn," Morrison said, his tone shifting to something decidedly less friendly, "perhaps you should reconsider your approach to employee relations. In my experience, companies that punish authenticity and partnership don't tend to retain their best talent very long." The implicit threat was clear. Morrison Industries represented 30% of Sterling and Associates' annual revenue. If he walked, half the firm would go with him. "Of course, Mr. Morrison," Isabella said through gritted teeth. "We certainly appreciate your perspective on the matter." "Excellent." Morrison smiled at Aurora and Finn. "I look forward to seeing what other brilliant campaigns you two create together. Good day, everyone." As Morrison left, the conference room erupted in whispered conversations. Aurora remained standing, her hand still in Finn's, her heart pounding with a mixture of triumph and disbelief. Isabella gathered her materials with sharp, angry movements. "This meeting is adjourned," she said tersely. "Ms. Banks, Mr. Cole, my office. Now." But as they followed Isabella out of the conference room, Aurora felt completely different than she had walking in. She'd fought for her love publicly and won. She'd refused to be intimidated or separated from the man who made her brave. And she'd done it all while maintaining her professional integrity and her commitment to excellent work. The walk to Isabella's office felt like a victory parade. Aurora could feel the admiration and respect of her colleagues, could sense the shift in how they saw her, not as a woman who'd compromised her professionalism for love, but as someone who'd been brave enough to fight for both excellence and authenticity. That, Finn said quietly as they waited for the elevator, was the most magnificent thing I've ever witnessed. Aurora turned to look at him, seeing her own exhilaration reflected in his hazel eyes. "We did it," she said, hardly believing it herself. "We actually did it." "You did it," Finn corrected, bringing her hand to his lips and pressing a kiss to her knuckles right there in the hallway, not caring who saw them. "You were absolutely fearless." "I was terrified," Aurora admitted. "But I was more terrified of losing you than of losing my job." "And now you don't have to lose either," Finn said, his smile radiant with love and pride and something that looked like wonder. Isabella's final confrontation was almost anticlimactic after Morrison's intervention. The senior partner was clearly furious but also clearly defeated. She couldn't fire them without risking the firm's biggest client, couldn't transfer them without looking vindictive and petty. "You've won this round," Isabella said coldly as they sat across from her mahogany desk. "But don't think this is over. I'll be watching both of you very carefully." "Good," Aurora said calmly. "You'll get to see some excellent work." As they left Isabella's office, Aurora felt something she'd never experienced before, the intoxicating combination of professional triumph and personal happiness. She'd refused to choose between her career and her heart, and somehow, miraculously, she'd been allowed to keep both. "So," Finn said as they stepped into the elevator together, "what do we do now?" Aurora looked at him. This man who'd inspired her to be braver than she'd ever thought possible, who'd stood by her while she fought for their future, who loved her not in spite of her ambition but because of it, and felt her heart overflow with certainty. "Now," she said, reaching up to straighten his tie in full view of anyone who cared to look, "we go back to work. Together. As partners in every sense of the word." "I love you," Finn said, right there in the elevator, his voice carrying clearly to anyone within earshot. "I love you too," Aurora replied, equally clearly, equally unashamed. "And I'm done hiding it." As the elevator doors opened and they stepped out into their professional world, their world, where they belonged together, Aurora felt the last of her fears melt away. She'd chosen love over fear, authenticity over safety, partnership over the lonely pursuit of individual success. And it turned out that sometimes, when you're brave enough to fight for what matters most, you discover that you don't have to sacrifice anything at all. Sometimes, the best choices are the ones that scare you the most. Sometimes, love really does conquer all. Chapter 7. 6 months later, Aurora stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of their new corner office, yes, their office, because Sterling and Associates had finally acknowledged what everyone already knew: Cole and Banks were a team in every sense of the word. The Manhattan skyline glittered in the late afternoon sun, and Aurora couldn't help but smile as she remembered another window, another view, on the night that had changed everything. "Admiring your empire?" Finn's voice was warm with affection as he came up behind her, his hands settling on her waist with the easy familiarity of a man who'd earned the right to touch her whenever he wanted. Aurora leaned back against his chest, feeling the solid warmth of him, breathing in the scent that had become as necessary to her as air. "Admiring how far we've come," she corrected, turning in his arms to face him. Finn looked good, better than good, actually. Success suited him. The corner office came with natural light that was perfect for his sketching, and he'd been creating again, really creating, not just producing corporate marketing materials but art that mattered. His latest series, abstract paintings inspired by their love story, was being featured in a Soho gallery next month. The Morrison Industries account wants to expand their campaign to include their entire European division, Aurora said, unable to keep the excitement out of her voice. And James Morrison specifically requested that we handle it personally. Of course he did, Finn said, his smile proud and unsurprised. We're unstoppable together. Always have been. The past 6 months had proven him right in ways that still sometimes took Aurora's breath away. Their partnership, both professional and personal, had become legendary within the industry. They'd won 4 major accounts, been featured in Marketing Week as the power couple redefining corporate collaboration, and had been headhunted by 3 different firms who wanted to lure them away from Sterling and Associates. They'd turned down every offer. Not because they were loyal to Isabella, who had maintained a chilly but professional relationship with them, but because they'd built something here together, something authentic and meaningful that couldn't be replicated anywhere else. There's something else, Aurora said, her voice taking on a tone that made Finn's eyes sharpen with attention. Caroline said there's been talk about making us senior partners. Both of us. Equal partnership stakes. Finn's eyes widened. Senior partners? Aurora, that's incredible. That's everything you've ever wanted. One of the things I've always wanted, Aurora corrected, reaching up to straighten his tie. A gesture that had become second nature, her way of claiming him in small, intimate moments throughout their professional days. The other thing I wanted is already right here. Before Finn could respond, their office door burst open and Caroline swept in with her usual dramatic flair, carrying a bottle of champagne and wearing a grin that could have powered half of Manhattan. I hope you 2 lovebirds are ready to celebrate, Caroline announced, setting the champagne on Aurora's desk with a flourish. Because I just came from the partners meeting, and you are now looking at Sterling and Associates' newest senior partners. Aurora felt her knees go weak. Both of us? Both of you, Caroline confirmed, her smile so wide it looked like it might split her face. Equal stakes, equal say in company direction, and, get this. They're restructuring the entire firm around your collaborative model. Apparently, every other team wants to work the way you 2 do. Aurora looked at Finn, seeing her own amazement reflected in his hazel eyes. They'd not only survived the corporate politics and professional challenges, they'd fundamentally changed how their industry thought about partnership and collaboration. There's more, Caroline said, clearly enjoying her role as harbinger of good news. Morrison Industries isn't the only major client who's requested your team specifically. Blackstone Environmental, Henderson Holdings, and 3 other Fortune 500 companies have reached out through their networks. You 2 are going to need to hire your own team just to manage the demand. Finn pulled Aurora into his arms, spinning her around their shared office while she laughed with pure joy. When he set her down, she was breathless and giddy and more in love than she'd thought it was possible to be. We did it, she said, hardly believing it herself. We actually did it. You did it, Finn said, echoing his words from that dramatic morning 6 months ago. You were brave enough to fight for what we have, and look what happened. Aurora shook her head. We did it. Together. As partners. Caroline popped the champagne with theatrical precision, filling 3 glasses and raising hers in a toast. To Aurora and Finn, who proved that sometimes the best business decision you can make is falling in love with your perfect collaborator. They clinked glasses, and Aurora felt the bubbles dance on her tongue like liquid celebration. Everything she'd ever wanted professionally was finally within her grasp, and she had the man she loved standing beside her to share in the triumph. You know, Caroline said with a mischievous twinkle in her eye, there's one more piece of news I should probably mention. Aurora and Finn exchanged glances. What now? Isabella submitted her resignation this morning. Effective at the end of the month. Caroline's expression grew serious. Apparently, Morrison Industries wasn't the only client who'd been questioning her management style. The board decided it was time for new leadership. Aurora felt a complex mix of emotions. Relief, vindication, and surprisingly, a little sadness. Isabella had been wrong about so many things, but she'd also been a powerful woman trying to navigate a corporate world that hadn't always been kind to ambitious females. "I hope she finds whatever she's looking for," Aurora said, and meant it. "Very diplomatic," Finn said, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Very partner-like." As Caroline left to spread the good news to the rest of the office, Aurora found herself alone with Finn in their shared space, surrounded by the evidence of their professional success and personal happiness. Her strategic frameworks were pinned up next to his creative sketches, their separate coffee mugs sat side by side on the windowsill, and their joint nameplate gleamed on the door, Aurora Banks and Finn Cole, senior partners. "I have something for you," Finn said suddenly, reaching into his desk drawer with the kind of nervous energy Aurora hadn't seen from him in months. "If it's another sketch of me sleeping at my desk, I'm going to start charging you modeling fees," Aurora teased, but her heart was starting to beat faster at the look in his eyes. "It's not a sketch," Finn said, pulling out a small velvet box that made Aurora's breath catch in her throat. "Though I did sketch this moment about 100 times, trying to figure out the perfect way to do this." Aurora's hands flew to her mouth as Finn dropped to one knee right there in their office, surrounded by marketing reports and creative briefs and all the beautiful mundane details of the life they'd built together. "Aurora Banks," Finn said, his voice steady despite the emotion shining in his eyes, "6 months ago, you were brave enough to fight for us when I was too scared to imagine we could have everything we wanted. You showed me that love doesn't make you weaker, it makes you unstoppable." Aurora felt tears streaming down her cheeks, but she didn't care. This was Finn, her partner, her collaborator, her best friend, and the love of her life, and he was kneeling in their shared office asking her to make their partnership official in every possible way. "You've made me braver, more creative, more myself than I ever thought I could be," Finn continued, opening the box to reveal a ring that was absolutely perfect, elegant and classic but with an artistic flair that was purely him. "Will you marry me? Will you be my partner in everything, for the rest of our lives?" "Yes," Aurora said, the word coming out as a sob of pure joy. "Yes, yes, absolutely yes." Finn slipped the ring onto her finger with hands that trembled slightly, and Aurora marveled at how perfect it felt, how right. Then he was standing and kissing her, and Aurora was kissing him back with all the love and gratitude and wild happiness that was overflowing from her heart. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Aurora looked down at her hand, at the symbol of their commitment sparkling next to the window where they'd first admitted they were falling in love. "I love you," she said, the words feeling new and powerful even after months of saying them. "I love you too," Finn replied, his smile radiant with joy and certainty. "Ready for the next adventure, partner?" Aurora looked around their office, at the view of Manhattan that represented all their professional dreams realized, at the man who'd helped her discover that she didn't have to choose between success and happiness after all. "With you," she said, reaching up to kiss him again. "I'm ready for anything." The sun was setting over the city, painting their office in shades of gold and rose that reminded Aurora of emergency lighting and shared blankets and the night that had started everything. In a few hours, they'd go home to the apartment they'd been sharing since their 3-month anniversary, where Finn's paintings hung next to Aurora's business awards and their coffee maker sat on the counter next to a vase of fresh flowers he brought her every Friday. Tomorrow, they'd come back to this office and create brilliant campaigns for clients who sought them out specifically because of their authentic partnership. They'd build their team, expand their influence, and continue proving that love and ambition weren't mutually exclusive, they were mutually reinforcing. But tonight, they were going to celebrate. They were going to call Aurora's mother and Finn's parents and share their news with the people who'd raised them to believe in love and hard work and the possibility of having both. They were going to open another bottle of champagne and dance in their living room to jazz music and make plans for a wedding that would be as unique and collaborative as everything else they did together. "You know what the best part is?" Aurora said as they gathered their things to leave for the day, their hands automatically intertwining as they walked toward the elevator. "What's that?" "We get to do this forever. Work together, create together, build something beautiful together." Aurora squeezed his hand. We get to be partners in every sense of the word. Forever sounds perfect, Finn said, and leaned down to kiss her as the elevator doors closed around them. 3 floors down, in the same elevator where they'd first felt that electric awareness of each other, Aurora realized that sometimes the most important business decision you could make had nothing to do with quarterly projections or market strategies or partnership tracks. Sometimes the most important decision was simply choosing to be brave enough to love someone who made you want to be the best version of yourself, both professionally and personally. As they walked out into the Manhattan evening, hand in hand, Aurora felt the key pendant, the one Finn had given her that represented access to all the hidden parts of himself, resting warm against her chest. Soon she'd wear another symbol too, one that represented their commitment to building a life together that honored both their individual dreams and their shared vision. They'd started as colleagues, became collaborators, then lovers, then partners, and now they were going to be husband and wife. Each stage had built on the last, creating something stronger and more beautiful than either of them could have achieved alone. And it had all started with being locked in an office overnight, when workplace tension exploded into passionate desire and changed everything about who they thought they could be. So tell me, beautiful souls, have you ever had a moment when everything changed overnight? When you realized that running from love was actually running from yourself? Share your stories in the comments below. I read every single one, and your experiences inspire these tales of the heart. If this story touched your heart, show some love with that like button. Subscribe for more passionate stories of love conquering fear. And ring that notification bell. Tomorrow we're diving into another tale of unexpected passion that will make your heart race with possibility.